Hello everyone and welcome to This Nintendo Life episode 184. My name is NBZ and I'm looking outside, Bally. I don't see any snow yet. You know, we're in December. That is the legally mandated time at which snow should be falling and we should be singing Christmas songs and opening advent calendars. Of course, I don't have any of those things right now. I did buy my sister an advent calendar, but I don't have my own one, unfortunately.
Did you hear about the thunder snow that happened in Edinburgh?
That just sounds like a duo boon from Demeter and Zeus to me, Bally. That's how much Hades is in my brain right now.
Yeah. So I didn't know what thunder snow was, but the night before last, me and Caroline woke up at like 4 a.m. and just heard the biggest. It sounded like a damn explosion. Like it's the loudest thing I've ever heard, like in nature.
Wow!
Like it properly woke us up. And what was so disconcerting about it was that it didn't. So if you get thunder in like summer or autumn, it just it'll like echo throughout the cloud or whatever. You can like hear it kind of reflect off buildings or whatever in the sky, and it kind of sounds like, okay, that was thunder. Because it was thunder snow, and it like it's basically a snow cloud where the sound doesn't essentially refract in the same way. It sounded like an actual explosion. And we were like, woke up, dude, and like car alarms went off outside. And then 20 minutes later, it happened again. And I don't know what we thought at the time, but we did go back to sleep. And then in the morning, I look on Twitter and everyone in Edinburgh is like, what the hell was that? And the police had to put out a statement saying that, that was thunder snow. This is how it's caused. It's perfectly natural.
There are no bombs going off.
People were genuinely like, it did sound like a bomb or like a plane crash or something horrendous. It was like that loud and unnerving.
The planet is shouting at us, Bally. You know, it is telling us to sort our shit out.
But like car alarms set off by thunder, like that is insane. Especially in Scotland where we don't have very extreme weather, so it's all just insane. But yeah, thunder snow.
Wow, that's I had no idea that happened. That's fucking wild.
Definitely look it up. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know, where do we go from there? Just exploding skies and snow. What I will say, thunder snow, good name for a band. Thunder snow. That's kind of thing you want to hear. Anyway, when Bally and I make the band Thunder Snow, we'll be sure to include references to video games, which is what we're here to talk about. Wow, look at that segue. I'm just a master of this shit. I'm MBZ. I'm joined by Bally. Hi, Bally.
Hi, MBZ. It's finally here. Game of the Year time. I'm pumped.
It is. We didn't do a good job of telling people last episode that it was going to be Game of the Year this week.
We were just so wrapped up in how amazing Sunshine was that we never got around to it.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I was blinded by the light of Mario Sunshine, and I did remember. Yes, by the flood. Drowned in it, and it was weeping away my tears.
See, this year's been weird because E3 was non-existent, and I'm not going to deny there were some fantastic streams and game announcements, and I loved that. I still miss E3. I love the density of those few days of just announcements, and I thought stringing it out over the summer, while there were some good announcements in there, I don't think I liked it as an overall way of doing things. And I think as a result,
it felt too just sparse and just chopped up, you know. And I didn't have a big hit.
As a result of kind of how that kind of backfired in a way, it's kind of made me a bit more hyped for Game of the Year, because this is obviously one of the best times of the year in video games. We obviously got the Game Awards. We've got all our Game of the Year things to do, and all these other outlets doing Game of the Year, and it's exciting. I'm very pumped this year, and obviously a very strong year.
Yeah, totally. Even if Nintendo themselves didn't publish a whole lot, there's a lot of good stuff that came out on the system. A lot of stuff we'll dig into, but that will be next week. So we'll obviously talk about it at the end of the show as well, and probably somewhere in between. But if you do want to send us your Game of the Year list for 2020, then send them to our email address, which Bally will tell you right now.
Please send them to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. I think Game of the Year, so we'll be doing Nintendo systems. If you want to send us your Nintendo systems list, that would be great, but you can send us wider lists as well. That's also welcome.
Yeah, and that's weird we say Nintendo systems now when they only have one system these days. It's like, did they release a 3DS game this year? I don't think they did. I think it's truly dead.
Is this the first year that it's truly dead?
I believe so. I mean, Persona Q2 came out last year, but that wasn't a Nintendo published thing. I believe, I don't know, the last Nintendo published thing, was it Metroid Samus Returns? Maybe there was something after that, some late port that came out. Maybe it was one of the Dragon Quest games. Or
It was a WarioWare Gold.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there are a few things. But anyway, at this point in time, we want your Switch lists, your top 20. Your top 20. That's everyone's played 20 games this year. I think I've barely played 20 new games this year. I think I'm probably around the 20 mark at this point in time. But yes, please send those in. Those would be great. And we will read some of those out next time. But let's get into the show, Bally. What are we going to be talking about on this episode?
First segment, we're going to talk about the games that we have been playing. Second segment, we are going to read out some of your games of the year that didn't actually come out this year in the second segment. And then the third segment, we're going to do our own personal top 10 lists of our top 10 games of the year that didn't actually come out this year.
Absolutely. Lots of things to choose from. Bally's list, a bit of a murderer's row, so I'm a little interested to see what you pick there, Bally. You've played a lot of very good games this year that didn't come out in 2020.
Yes, it was hard to pick, and there are games that are probably comfortably in my top 50 games of all time that aren't even in the top 10.
Wild. Fucking wild. But yes, we'll get to that. Let's start, though, with video games we've been playing recently. Bally, Slay the Spire. It's an addiction, it's a drug. For me, at least, it was for a long time. And, sometimes they're trying to hook you on these drugs. And I wouldn't say you're hooked necessarily on it, or maybe you are. I don't know. Tell me about it. You've been playing Slay the Spire, Bally.
Yeah, I've been on and off it for like the last few months, just doing a run here, a run there, and then just sort of recently did a lot of runs. And I guess for those who don't know, if you aren't aware, it has been talked a lot about on the show, but it is a deck building, dungeon crawling roguelike, basically.
It's kind of like turn-based RPG as well, because the battles themselves are you take turns, the enemy takes turns. But the cool thing about it is you always know what move the enemy is going to make. So it's kind of like Into the Breach in that way of like you have information about what's going to happen and therefore you can work your way around.
You have some information. Like there are times where they might debuff you, but you don't know what kind of debuff or something. But if they are going to do damage, as you say, yes, you do know exactly how much damage they will do, which you can plan for. And I've talked about on the show how I loved the deck building card game Dominion, and so that's kind of another reason I was very excited to try Slay the Spire. And having played a lot more Slay the Spire, I've realized how short that comparison to Dominion, that comparison falls a bit short, because I think that card games are great, but I think they struggle to do stuff like stat buffs and other effects, and when you add in the complexity,
well, it just becomes complicated, doesn't it, when you're having to keep track of it yourself?
The complexity of like relics and things. And Dominion is such an elegant and simple game where you're essentially building up draw power, actions, and money, and those are your three things that the cards work around, and not much beyond that. And this game is much more complicated in a number of things it does, but that fundamental structure of building a deck, having access to cards, getting stuff like draw power, and you're essentially more often than not building up defense and attack in this, whereas Dominion is those other three things I was talking about. But it still all plays together, and it is all about synergizing those cards, and it's a very satisfying process. And I was worried when I first played the game and I got my butt kicked, and I was thinking like, I don't actually like, judging by the amount of damage that some of those enemies do even early on, I was thinking like, I don't think I'm ever going to beat this game. Like, I don't see how the cards in my hand are powerful enough to ever take on these enemies. And to this point, although you can upgrade cards, I would still argue I'm not sure how beatable the game is without relics. I don't know your opinion on this, MZ, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people out there who have done no relic runs. That must exist, because people have played this game to death and done all different options with it. I definitely think there are ways that you don't necessarily need them as long as you have a good enough synergistic strategy that will roll things together. Like, for example, the strategy that I was doing when we streamed it recently was just having as many shivs as possible. And so that was built around a bunch of cards, not necessarily around my relics. The relics definitely helped that strategy to some degree, but the card that increased the amount of damage the shivs did, the one that gave me shivs at the start of my turn, the one that gave me 3 shivs at once, the one that, would, when you did damage, it would also do damage every time I made a card play. All of that was just cards. That was nothing to do with relics, right? So that strategy was mainly built around the power of how do these things interact with one another. And yes, of course, like I did get benefits, like having more mana to draw from as a result of a couple of relics that I got. But fundamentally, the strategy was based around the cards themselves. So I do think it is possible, just maybe a little more tricky.
And I actually think so. I've only done one successful run, and that was with the Ironclad. And I brought with me my most fundamental rule from Dominion into that run that helped me beat the game, which was very satisfying. And that's all about deck bloat and access to cards. And I've said before on the show, but there's this card in Dominion called the Chapel, and it allows you to trash cards from your deck. So you're literally trashing cards from your deck out of the game. Like they never come back into your deck. And you can do that in Slay the Spire. It's very hard. Like you have to pay money at shops to burn a single card. But there are other things in the game that can help you also trash cards. But by the end,
whenever you have a card pop up, you can just choose to decline it, can't you? You can just skip past it. Yeah,
exactly. So you can always choose to not bloat your deck further. So 2 things I did with the Ironclad was, by the end of the run, I had managed to burn every single plain strike card. So the standard attack is like a 5 damage strike, and I managed, because I was picking up so many other attack cards, and I wanted access to them, I managed to burn every single plain strike. So I think that's all 5 of them.
Wow.
And on top of that, for about in the entire third area, I don't think I even picked up a new card, because I was like, my deck is working. I don't want to change it by bloating it in some certain way or do anything to it. So every time I was offered a new card, and I even had a power that allowed me to pick up new cards while I was resting. It's like you can pick up new cards in your dreams essentially while you're resting. And I declined every single one and still managed to beat the game, because I just think it's one of those things that I think you just learn the hard way, is that your deck can bloat so easily. And sure, all those cards might be great, but unless you're deciding, right, these are the cards I need, these are the cards I need to beat this enemy, to beat the game, any card you add that doesn't fit into that strategy is ultimately waste in some ways. And sure, it might still have a good effect, but it's stopping you accessing another card to get your machine going, essentially. And I love that feeling about it, because I was playing a lot of the Silent, and obviously I love all the stuff with shivs and poison that the Silent has, and I actually played the Defect as well, and I got to the third area the first time with the Defect, and I was like, this is awesome, like I love this character. But then I did just randomly pick Ironclad because I hadn't played him in a long time, and managed to beat it. And I love how different the decks are. Like the card builds are so different. And even within the Ironclad or the Silent, like Silent, as you said, you did like a shiv run and barely used poison. Likewise, my runs with the Silent often had a lot more poison, but there's other stuff the Silent can do. Ironclad, the run I did that was successful, I had this card that cost 3 energy and gave you 2 strength per turn once played, like, and it
just kept stacking.
It kept stacking, and I upgraded that card as soon as possible. And I also, because it was such a powerful card, and it obviously used 3 energy, often when bosses were going to attack me for even 20 or 25 damage, I would take the hit and play the card's strength up, because I knew that 5-6 turns down the line, I'd be so powerful that any of my cards could like eviscerate the boss. So it was like this balance of healing up, trying to do this, trying to do that, and using that card no matter what, in conjunction with like my cards that help you to draw more cards and play a number of attacks. So it was just like this incredible satisfaction of like, I found my winning formula and I want to push that as far as possible. Like it's very satisfying in that sense.
Right, exactly. The entire premise of the game is going into it not knowing what you're going to get, finding something that works, and trying to just make that work for as long as you possibly can. I think one of the issues that I came across when we were doing our run on stream was I had a really good thing going, and a lot of it was built around this card 1,000 Cuts, which meant every time I played a card, enemies would take 2 damage because I'd upgraded that. And as soon as I started getting like, this Poison Cloud one that I picked up, and then I just picked up some other thing like, oh, let's just take another one of these. We get to games where I'm not getting 1,000 cuts as early as I would like, and as a result, things start to fall apart, and it doesn't become as lean or as kind of predictable as you would like it to be, and that's the kind of thing you want.
It became so clear. We were like, why are you struggling so much against this boss? It's like, oh, we've not played 1,000 cuts yet, and it's like, it just became so simple, like that formula, like we need to play that card before the rest of this deck works. And yeah, I think there's a lot of cards like that where the whole deck can swing around that one card. And having a 20 card deck versus a 30, 40 card deck, you're having the time essentially to try and find that card to get everying going.
Exactly.
Like, it makes a huge difference. So,
and when you only have like a limited health pool that you can refresh very rarely, it's a lot about making sure you take the minimal amount of damage possible for each encounter you go into. And so if you have one bad encounter like I did, then it really throws you off completely because you're off on a back foot every single time you go into the next one.
Yeah, and like one cool thing about the Ironclad is he gets like 6 health every single battle. So like it's almost like he's designed that, he is going to take a bit of damage, maybe more so than the other 2 characters. But if you play it right, you can heal out of it and so on. He's also got like quite a high health bar. I think he's like 80 HP. So I'm incredibly impressed. I knew I would be, but I think going from starting the game and thinking I'm never going to beat this to actually, if I think do that, and I was really reluctant to go on stream with you, MBZ, and because I was so proud of like not going to any guides or looking up cards or anything. I was worried watching you a bit and just see how you play a certain character was going to like make me think, oh, I could do that, and it's obviously much more complicated than that, but I felt comfortable that you were playing silent, and I had just been on a silent run where I got to the final boss, and I felt like I don't care what MZ does, whether he beats it or not. I've seen a lot of aspects of the silent, and if he wants to spoil me on some silent cards, that's fine, because I've still got like Ironclad and the defect to like kind of suss, as it were. So like I would say like try not looking stuff up, because it is really satisfying just playing with different builds and seeing what happens. And then obviously if you're not having a good time, obviously look stuff up. But like I think it's also like it's one of those games where looking stuff up isn't necessarily going to help you, because your run is always going to be its own thing, right? The number of variables, I would say, are even higher than a game like Hades, and that sounds ridiculous, but when you actually think about the structure of runs versus that game, as many variables as there are in Hades, there's a ton. I think there's even more in Slay the Spire once you factor in different types of potions, different relics, different cards, and how they all draw together. It's actually insane the number of things you can do, even with three decks, and then obviously you unlock a 4th deck as well.
Yes, the Watcher, who I have tried once and just ran away screaming, basically, because it was just really complicated and hard. And reminded me very much of that one Mask character in SteamWorld Quest, who I didn't like playing as. With the stances, and I just don't like stances, I think, as an idea, maybe. Maybe I need to go back and play more Watcher, but Watcher seemed like that's the type of character where I do want to go and find a tutorial video about, just to figure out what to do and what mistakes not to make. But maybe I will. I'll go back, and I've only really put 25 hours into Slay the Spire total, so it's not as much as I've done with Dead Cells, which I think I'm about 30, and Hades at this point I'm like 75 hours into Hades. It's one of my lesser played roguelikes, maybe, but it is still up there for me as it is just one of the most well-designed games I've ever played. It is just phenomenal in terms of its balance and its thought and just the way things can come together. Every single time I go for a run, you're always just like hooked, and you always have that sense of tension, because even now, like these other games, I get to the point where I'm pretty much beating Hades most times when I get to the end of that game. Slay the Spire, it is just a flip of the coin, really. Like I still find it really hard to get. And granted, we were playing the Silent, which I think is by far of those 3 starting characters the hardest one to get to the end with and win. But I still don't go into Slay the Spire with all the knowledge I have, thinking, oh, I'm going to get through this.
It's very challenging. It's very satisfying. wholly impressed by this game, and yeah, I've not sunk as much time as Hades by a long shot, but that's not to say it's a worse game in any way whatsoever. Like, I think it's I've not played a ton of roguelikes.
And they're both very different, right? Like, it's one of these things with the roguelikes where it's this one idea that has been applied to so many different types of games.
Saying rogue first to describe a game like Slay the Spire is almost a disservice to the deck building structure and everything of that game. Like, that's the cool part. I mean, the fact you're replaying it is obviously cool as well, but it's like it's a real thinking person's game. Like, you really have to think, not necessarily how you play the deck at the time. That requires a lot of skill on its own, but I think the actual building of the deck and knowing when to spend your money on relics and when to fight mini bosses, because you're obviously picking your route each time. Like, it's a real impressive game, and yeah, I've not sunk a ton of time into it yet, but I'd be very keen to just keep dipping into it every now and then. And if it's on sale on Switch, it's a good system to pick it up on, because I've been playing on Game Pass, and it's not ideal for Game Pass. I don't like setting up my telly and whatever to play this game.
You definitely want to have it, on a handheld device, or even on phones, which is available on as well.
Oh, interesting. Right.
And I did once try to do it via Steam Link on my phone from linking it to my PC upstairs, because I'm playing on PC for the most part. And it didn't work amazing, just because the controls aren't built for a touch interface on PC versus on Switch, where I believe they are, which would be a much better way to play through it. But yeah, the thing with this game is it is the closest another game has come to giving me the feelings of playing competitive Pokemon, right? Like,
right.
It is that kind of idea of synergies and making things work together in harmony that just you don't really find that many other places.
Yeah. And like, SteamWorld Quest was the other kind of deck builder, as it were, and I just think this game really stomps all over SteamWorld Quest in so many ways. Maybe apart from like presentation and music, because I do like that in SteamWorld Quest.
Yes.
But I think the structure of that roguish aspect, and there's just so many more layers with the buffs, I feel like, with this game versus SteamWorld. And
the other thing is, like, I don't like... It's why I wasn't that into Hearthstone. Like, I played a good amount of Hearthstone, but I'm not the type of person who wants to think up, I have to build a deck. Like, I remember doing it back in the day for Pokemon cards, and I think we had a much easier time with that, because there were kind of easy fundamentals to making a Pokemon card deck that were kind of simple. Mm-hmm. Yeah, even though I don't know if we were doing it correctly or not, who knows. However, with this game, because you are building it piece by piece and you are playing it as you go, the process of creating a deck as you play is so much more appealing to me than being like, choose your 9 cards or choose your 20 cards and then go into a match and see if they work together. If they don't, have you learned anything about how they work together? Probably not, because when you're first starting something like Hearthstone, you're like, I don't know what any of these cards are and what they do properly anyway. So yeah, I think it's that aspect that really helps it for me.
It's interesting you say that, because we got back into Pokemon cards in quite a big way at university, and we're like building decks, and we'd like do full-on drafts of all the top cards and build decks based on those drafts. And then after that, we discovered Dominion and was like, this is so much better than Pokemon cards. It's also obviously so much cheaper, because you're not buying, like, Pokemon cards is existing not as much as to be a good trade, being a good battle game, as it is to sell more trading cards versus...
It's part of the merch empire, right? Like, exactly. It's why Pokemon is one of the most profitable franchises worldwide.
And when you extrapolate a card game where it's there for the mechanics, not to sell more cards, and Slay the Spire is kind of inspired by that ethos, it's just, you can go a really long way when you turn those systems into a video game, and Slay the Spire absolutely nails it. So yeah, I'm very impressed, and it's a very fitting game to include in an episode where we'll be talking about top 10 games of the year that didn't actually come out this year.
Yeah, we'll see. Did it get in? Did it place? Who knows? You'll have to wait and find out. I'll talk about a game that probably won't be talked about on this episode or next episode for that matter. Just by the fact that I do still like it. Okay, so Panzer Paladin. Usually every year, Bally, there are a couple of games that come out on Switch and are kind of side-scrolling, pixel art aesthetic indies that tend to not get a huge amount of coverage, but I am always into them, right? Like you think of something like Katana Zero, which I think is criminally underrated, didn't get as much love as it should have done, just a fantastic fucking game. Or something like The Messenger, right? Like you get one or two of these a year, and sometimes I jump on them straight away, sometimes I will...
I was gonna say, I think those two games made way bigger waves than this one, but yeah.
Oh yeah, they totally did, totally did. But you know what I mean, right? Like the Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, and the second game of that came out this year as well. So yeah, usually I'll either jump on them straight away or I'll wait a little bit for them to go on sale, and I did that with two games this year, which the first one was Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 2, and the second one is Panzer Paladin. So I first became aware of this game from a Nintendo World Report review from Zach Miller, who gave this game a high score. I believe it was a 9, actually. And so I'd been keeping my eye on it for a while. It is a side-scrolling NES-style action platformer. Probably more on the action side, really, kind of more Mega Man vibes than, Mario vibes in that sense. And you play as a big robot. You play as the Panzer, which I believe is the German word for tank. I believe that is correct. But he is a big tank, and inside you are controlling, you have a little kind of character who can jump out of the mech sometimes and swing on different elements and do some different platforming stuff. So it reminded me a little bit of Gato Roboto. I guess Gato Roboto also factors into this conversation of, one of those types of games that comes out and goes under the radar. And so fundamentally, I think this game is really cool because I like the idea of side-scrolling Mega Man game, however, with a much bigger, more chunky, beefy protagonist. Like you have a lot of HP, so you can take a lot of hits. And one of the core design ideas behind this game is your weapons you pick up from the level, and the more you use them, they will degrade and take damage and break. Now, if you're one of those people who didn't like Breath of the Wild because they're breaking weapons, well, here you go. Welcome to another game that breaks your weapons. It also does the thing that Breath of the Wild does, which is when it's like right near the end and it's almost dead, you're better off throwing it because it'll do way more damage by like hitting an enemy by being thrown than you would just using it regularly at the end. So that's a neat thing as well. And you also use the weapons for checkpoints. So it kind of reminds me of Shovel Knight, because Shovel Knight, you would get the checkpoint and then you could choose to destroy it. In this game, you get to a checkpoint and you can choose whether you want to stick your sword into the ground in order to bank it, basically, for the checkpoint. This, in theory, is a great fucking idea, because you do get a bunch of weapons throughout the level. And you do have to choose, okay, which one am I going to use to give away? Is it one that I'm going to...
And so you stick it in the ground and lose it, but it is a checkpoint.
Yes, exactly, right? So it becomes a permanent checkpoint by doing that. This would be a great idea. However, these levels are exceedingly long, and because you are a big tank, you move rather slowly. The level design itself is also not super interesting, though it has some good ideas. For the most part, you're going right and hitting enemies with weapons. Sometimes they're a bit trickier. There's enemies who have shields who you have to go up and down with. I should mention your robot also has a shield, and so if you are ducking or if you're standing upwards, and you block different projectiles depending on where they come at you. So that is one element to it. But because these levels are really long, they should have a bunch of checkpoints, right? You think of a regular Shovel Knight level, you get maybe 5 or 6.
A modern game should have a lot of checkpoints, yes.
Totally, yeah, like it's 5 or 6 checkpoints. This game has 2. One mid-game checkpoint and one right before the end boss of the level. And let me tell you...
They do like Mega Man, don't they?
They really do. And so let me tell you that what happens is when I get to this part, I've spent maybe 6 minutes going through, get very carefully, trying to be playing safe.
Sorry, and let me just triple check. That one checkpoint in the middle is optional.
It is also optional, yeah, so you don't have to take it. If you want to be a masochist, that's fine as well. So you imagine my frustration where I get to this platforming point, and I would say the platforming with the little person who's inside the tank, I guess, who is the actual character, she basically has a whip that you can use to swing on little chains. It's almost Castlevania-esque, but controls a bit better than that. There is an entire section in one of the levels, the Tanzania level, where I kept getting to that point, and I would just fuck up because the controls... not perfect, and just trying to get the jump right and get the momentum right, not super easy. One tiny mistake, okay, back to the beginning of the level. And boy, I kept putting my Switch down. At that level, I think it was like the third level I attempted. And because it's Mega Man, you can choose what level you do. I think there are 11 total. And they're all really cool because they're in different locations around. You basically have a world map. And it's like Scotland, USA, Tanzania, Australia, Japan, like all these places. And each place...
I need to hear about this Scotland level.
Yeah, I can't remember much about it, if I'm honest.
Is it full of castles that there aren't really like as many castles?
Yeah, I mean, the boss of it is a big purple dragon, so it's like, medieval, right?
Yes, I see.
So that kind of tracks to some degree. But yeah, this being the third level I came across, I was like, fuck's sake, man. And I wondered, because there are difficulty toggles. I was playing on normal for the most part when I started. I beat the first 2 levels on normal, and the bosses are pretty tricky.
Can you turn it down mid-game?
You can turn it down mid-game, which is good.
Okay, but that's not going to help you with the platforming, is it?
No. So this is the thing. I turned it to easy, and all easy really does is it makes some of the sections, easier by having less enemies there, so you don't have as much bloat to deal with in terms of taking damage yourself. I don't believe it changes much else, though. Maybe it changes the amount of damage you take.
Makes the platforms wider.
No, but that would be a real easy mode that would make sense, right? No, they really should have done something about this in terms of making the easy mode have way more checkpoints. Like, that would be a very easy fix for them to do to make it just so much more playable. But that's not the case. So I turned it to easy. Guess what? I get to that same section and I fucking die again. And I'm like, well, okay. I think this is like one of the only sticking points, though, with level design in terms of the entire game, because the rest of it doesn't have as bad falling pits, but there are moments where you'll just mistime a jump, and because you are kind of large and a little bit unwieldy.
Yeah, what's platforming in the mech like? It doesn't sound like it's the most comfortable thing.
It doesn't feel super great, especially like because you are quite bulky and your hitbox is large. Sometimes they'll do like little birds who fly at you, like the bats in Castlevania, for example, and getting the exact hitbox on them can be a little annoying, even though, like, for the most part, the spears you have or the swords you have good different arcs to them. And I should say, like, the weapon variety is pretty cool. Each level has different themed weapons that you get from regular enemies, and then every boss you defeat has a special weapon that is much more powerful, but also still breaks. So you kind of want to save the boss weapons you get from one boss to use on the next boss. You don't want to use it regularly in a level. And the other thing is you can actually use the weapons for spells, which I didn't actually realize until right the end of my playtime with it, because they teach it you in the tutorial and they tell you once, and then I just totally forgot about it. I just completely blanked on how to do it. So for the most part, when my weapons were getting to the end of their tether, I was just throwing them at enemies to do the double damage versus pressing the 2 shoulder buttons, which does a spell, which would have been really helpful in some of these instances against some of the bosses or things like that. I think one of them actually heals you as well, that would have been great, but I didn't do that. I just went through the game without this. I had the knowledge, but it was so long ago when I started it that it kind of seeped out and I'd forgotten how to do it. But yeah, that's the thing, right, is you do have a bit of mobility in the air. You have a move where if you hold up and press the attack button, after you jump, you'll kind of do a thrust into the air, which will give you a bit of extra momentum to get up to higher platforms. And this is really tricky when you're going over a gap, because like getting your finger to roll to the up from the side and then doing the attack button, not the jump, after you've done the jump just to get the little extra edge, it just feels a little bit clunky. Though the game moves quite well, and for the most part, when you're hitting enemies, like, there's a satisfaction to it. I am in two minds about it, just because for some people, I do think they will enjoy it. But I was going back and I was reading the Reset Era thread, and so many people were saying the same thing about, like, this game is just not well thought out in terms of, if you're going to have this, you deliberately give the player this really big character who has a lot of health so that they can take a lot of hits, so that they can last their way through these long checkpoints. However, the insta-death pits completely fly in the face of that idea. And, like, that's the type of thing where, back in the NES days, of course, that's how games were designed back then. But it really is one of those things that sets this game apart from a Messenger or a Shovel Knight or any of these other modern independent games, which have learned from the last 30 years of game design. And this game feels like the developers being, no, we wanted to make a true NES game. And I think that really hurts its playability in the modern day and makes it so that it's a game, especially because when I found out that after beating all 11 levels, it didn't open up the end part to me, and I have no idea why, and I think it's because, for the most part, I beat the levels on easy and not normal. I beaten 2 of the levels on normal, the rest of them I beat on easy, so it's basically the developers saying, yeah, all that work you did on easy doesn't count actually, you're not good enough, we're not going to let you do the end of this game. And also having read stuff on Reset Era about the end of the game having more of those bottomless pit things and annoying level design, I was like, you know what? I'm fine. I played through these 11 levels. I had a good enough time with them. The game looks really nice. The pixel art is excellent. Like, really, really good stuff. Just some pretty good tunes as well. Nothing super memorable, but, you know, it does the kind of basics that you're looking for from this game, which is why, looking at it from the outside and seeing that it got a decent review, I was like, oh yeah, this definitely seems up my alley, something I would really enjoy. But when you dig deeper, there are some of these problems that emerge that, for me, just make it not the type of experience that I want to be diving into. So it's unfortunate, because I do think there is an audience for this game out there, but I think they really need to go back to the drawing board on some of these ideas when you're putting out a game like this in the modern era. Because even a game like Bloodstained has figured it out, right? It's just like, hey, here's casual mode, which takes away knockback and doesn't have lives. And like, we have figured out at this point in time, lives, they don't fucking matter. Like, they are incredibly frustrating, annoying, archaic game design that I cannot fucking stand. And especially in an experience like this, it doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't make sense. This game is living in the past. It needs to move forward.
I'm really surprised everyone's not just copying that like Shovel Knight formula, where that game basically has more checkpoints, and then obviously it has no live system, but then you get the punishment with the money. So I'm not saying
totally.
Not every game has money. I'm assuming this game doesn't have like a currency in that sense. So maybe it would have to do something different. But Shovel Knight is that combination of you can sponge a lot of hits, but at the same time you've got insta death from a pit. So I'm not saying that's probably not the fault of this game. It's just that it needs to work around those things better than what it sounds like it's doing, you know? Like
totally. And I wouldn't have had this complaint had it not been for the fact that Tanzania level in particular puts a long platforming sequence over a lot of open gaps right before the first checkpoint of the level, which means that if you make one mistake, you are going back and doing 4 or 5 minutes of that same action platforming you have already done multiple times, and it is not that interesting, and it is not that difficult either. And that is fucking frustrating.
Yeah. Shovel Knight would put a checkpoint at the start of the hard section. It'd have a platforming section and then a checkpoint right at the end. So like, even if you keep dying, you know that you're going straight back to that platforming section, because I'm sure the developer is aware that that is a particularly hard section, you know, and you're going to do
absolutely X. Yeah. And yeah, it's really really frustrating, because this could have been something great, and it just isn't. It just isn't, and that's really unfortunate. But if you're the type of person who isn't as annoyed with these types of old school game design things, right? If you're an NES person who grew up with that system and you're like, I like that stuff actually, I want to be kicked in the teeth and I want to play levels again and again and again, then definitely check it out. I don't know if it's on sale anymore. It might go on sale again over Christmas, but I picked it up on the Black Friday sale on the eShop. It is Panzer Paladin. So give it a look and see if it's up your alley, but disappointing, unfortunately, for me, Bally. I did expect more from this one. But yes, that is going to close us out for the first segment. Don't go anywhere, however, because we'll be back after the break talking about some of your games of the year that didn't come out this year. See you in a bit. Okay, everyone, welcome back to the second half of the show, the second part, I should say, in which we shall be discussing some games of the year that didn't come out this year that you have sent in, which is nice. It's obviously a thing we like to hear and see what our community is playing and doing over, every single year of video games, and it's a good time to check in and maybe give us some ideas for things we might want to play in the future as well as everyone else.
Good year to play some old games. Nintendo's lineup has been fairly sparse, and there's been so many delays elsewhere that it's a good time to dip into the old backlog.
Absolutely, some good stuff, and we will get into these. Also, we should shout out that if you want to send in your 2020 games of the year on Nintendo platforms for this year, then send them to our email address for next time, Bally, which is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. Yes, we will read out your lists on the following show, where we will be discussing Nintendo platform games of the year for 2020. Cool. Well, let's kick it off with some of the lists from our community. We have Tim, who starts with number 5, Thronebreaker, The Witcher Tales. This game didn't hook me as much as I was expecting, so I didn't end up finishing it, but I enjoyed Gwent, and it sets up an interesting story. I would like to finish it next year. Number 4, Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, a nice 2D Zelda adventure. I have nothing bad to say about it, just not as much fun as the higher games on this list. Number 3, Return of the Obra Dinn. Lucas Pope delivers another uniquely crafted, exceptional experience. I know this game didn't click for MBZ, which is too bad, because for me this is one of, if not the best puzzle games ever made. Number 2, Slay the Spire. This game has deservedly been thoroughly praised at this point. A wholly unique game with incredible depth, interesting strategic choices, and loads of replayability. And number 1, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. 150 hours and absolutely worth every bit of it. An all-time classic. I was most impressed by how engaging even the smallest moments and side stories are. The quality of storytelling is unmatched. So yeah, a nice list there for sure. I know, obviously, we talked about Return of the Obra Dinn, how I know everyone who has played that just goes gaga for it. And my theory is that the people who didn't like it just didn't talk about it that year when it came out.
They didn't want to admit that they didn't understand it or couldn't figure it out. It's pride.
No, I very much understand Return of the Obra Dinn. It's fucking intimidating, man. That thing is just too much for me to handle. But I'm glad that Tim really enjoyed it.
We were briefly discussing off mic that I plan to play Witcher 3 next year when it has a Series X PS5 version, and you're probably going to get your new PC starting next year. We might both play Witcher 3 next year.
Should we do a Witcher 3 diary as we play through over 5 months?
Great idea.
That game is in my top 5 games of all time. It is phenomenal. So, good one. We have our next list from Acerbis, Bally.
Cerberus has number 3, The Talos Principle. I'm a sucker for these first-person narrative puzzle room games. Those epiphanic moments that come from both solving puzzles and from twists in the story make them one of my favorite types of game, and The Talos Principle is an exemplary one of these. Number 2, Katana Zero. The gameplay is great, and watching back your path through the level in real time without your time slowdown and power makes you feel like a practiced samurai. Dodging attacks and slicing bullets out of the air, I was surprised by how gripped I was with the story and the world it takes place in. Number 1, Dicey Dungeons. I feel like this game has been severely overlooked in the sea of roguelike deck builders we've gotten recently, and that's a real shame because I love this game. It is a fun game show aesthetic and absolutely bopping soundtrack, and it continues to throw new ideas at you right up until the final level. I had so much fun learning and eventually conquering this game, even if sometimes I got infuriated with my dice rolls.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Dicey Dungeons. I actually own it on PC because it was being given away on itch.io. Terry Kavanagh, who made VVV, is the guy behind this game as well. And yeah, it has a really cool look to it. So I would like to check it out, especially because I'm now into roguelike deck builders, Bally. Weirdly enough, it's one of those genres for me now. Yeah, for sure.
I'm keen to play Katana Zero on Game Pass. It's sitting there, and I've now I've trimmed my playlist on Game Pass to... I've cut all Microsoft first-party games off the list, and it's purely a list of third parties, so that I'm aware of things that might actually leave Game Pass, because the first party
you
stuff
do realize this will get to the point where you will just never play any of those other games because they will never leave, right?
This is also true, but there's so much quality in the other games that I definitely want to dip in with stuff like Sunset Overdrive and Halo 3 and stuff like that, so I'll get there.
Great list. I would also, Talos Principle is one of those games that I've heard a bunch about, and I worry that I would just get motion sick because it's another first-person puzzle game like The Witness. That really tends to make me very ill, but we'll see. Jackpot writes in with the next one. Number 5, 9 hours, 9 persons, 9 doors. As a fan of Danganronpa, who got a Vita this year, yes, I got a Vita in 2020, wow boy, 999 was a clear pick for me. A very interesting mystery which really does keep you guessing until the end. 999 has fun escape room puzzle to solve also, although some of them did become a bit trial and error-y for me. Love the branching narrative. Number 4, South Park Fractured But Whole. It's unfortunate that South Park is such a polarizing franchise, as this game really is a solid RPG. For those that enjoy or are not turned off by South Park-style humor, this game is an obvious winner. More games need to experiment with the grid-style combat South Park uses. Number 3, Danganronpa 2/3. I had to cheat here because Danganronpa really is a trilogy. Having played the second and third game this year, I can now firmly say that Danganronpa has surpassed Phoenix Wright for me as a go-to digital novel-style game. The twists, turns, and surprises are seriously next level. Plus, who doesn't feel the hype when some of those end-of-trial tracks hit? Number 2, Slay the Spire. During the lockdown earlier this year, there was a 2-week span where my girlfriend and I put nearly 150 combined hours into Slay the Spire. The game makes you feel intelligent for finding combinations of cards, and even a deck you have played several times before can hold new surprises. The level of synergy you can create makes you feel incredibly strong at times. As someone who's intimidated by traditional deck building, e.g. Magic the Gathering, Spire is approachable and yet still a deep game. 10 out of 10 would recommend. And number 1, Persona 4 Golden. Persona 5 is my favourite game of all time, and while I don't think 4 hits quite the same level as 5, I can easily see why it's so highly regarded. Persona just feels like home. You spend so much time with this cast of characters that you really do feel like you begin to know them. Managing your time by picking and choosing your activities for each day is a treat and is a comfortable yet important level of stress. The music and style are both knocked out of the park here. Play Persona 4 Golden, please. Shout out to Acerbus for your passion on 999. So glad I played it. Very, very good list there with a lot of my favourites. Those top 3 are just pretty fucking strong, man. And I do agree with Jackpot. Danganronpa for me is a stronger franchise than Phoenix Wright overall.
A lot of love for Slay the Spire.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, loads of Slay the Spire love coming out here, especially you talking about it this episode, Bally. It's just the Slay the Spire episode, timing. I guess. Yeah, perfect timing. Good stuff.
Our next list is from Matraya, who says, number 5 is A Short Hike, a really charming and enjoyable game. I love the aesthetic, the little funny characters you meet flapping around this little island. Just everything is great. Glad MBZ recommended this one. Number 4, Fire Emblem 4. We've discussed it a bit in the server, but yeah, it's not my favourite Fire Emblem, but certainly up there. The story and characters were a bit of a letdown for me personally, but I greatly enjoyed the map design, perhaps more so than any game in the series. Number 3, Among Us. Feels weird putting this game in the non-2020 games, but alas, it was released in 2018. Playing this with friends has been some of the most fun I've had this year, especially given the pandemic. Look forward to the future content. Number 2, Persona 5. There isn't much that's not been said on Persona 5, but yes, it's a fantastic JRPG. I personally felt the student city life was far stronger than the metaverse stuff, but both were still great. That said, to be honest, it ended up being blown out of the water by my number 1. Number 1, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. How the fuck was this a 2010 Wii game? Good story and characters, phenomenal music, amazing and beautiful world to explore, very fun combat, great UI, everything is just so good. You know a JRPG is well designed when I actually want to do the side quests. The biggest compliment I can award it is that I think it's the only game that competes with Breath of the Wild for Nintendo's best game.
Yeah, very good. I mean, it's I was very happy to go back to that game this year. It is still up there and maybe even higher in my estimation than it was before because the Definitive Edition is very good and it's nice to play it handheld properly as opposed to playing on the new 3DS like you did, Bally.
Yeah, that was an experience. We never got on the Among Us bandwagon.
No, we didn't. I know you mentioned to me that someone in your friend circle had invited you and Caroline to play Among Us with them, and you didn't end up doing it.
No, we
so
didn't.
You missed your
I
opportunity,
missed my
Bally.
opportunity. Can you get it like for free on your phone and just play with people? Yeah, so might do that at some point because it'd be good fun. Maybe
I know
like
that
over
people in
Christmas.
our Discord have done Among Us sessions before, so but
Cool.
I've never been in one of them. So
Nice.
it's the game of 2020. It seems like so probably should have played it. But hey,
Been nominated for multiplayer game of the year, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been nominated for quite a few awards at the Game Awards, which is interesting.
Very cool.
Great. Our next one is from PR Billy. Number 5, Halo 3 ODST, one of the few Halo games I've never played. A pretty big departure from the previous 3 games. Story is more down to earth, literally, with characters that actually convey emotion and have stories outside of kill the aliens, as they also tried an open world hub in this game. And while I personally feel that implementation is okay, it helps set the way for Halo Infinite. Number 4, Guilty Gear XX Accent Core Plus R. Can we just take a time out here? Just fucking fighting game names sometimes, and like Arxis and the way that they name video games, I just can't handle it. Anyway, absolutely terrible name, as PR Billy agrees with me. But this game is 10 plus years old and was given new life by implementing rollback netcode. I had tons of fun messing around with this with friends online. I'd never played any fighting games where the online experience felt like it was playing someone in person. Number 3, Guacamelee 2. Fantastic Metroidvania, shares a lot of similarities to the original, but the fighting system is just so fun linking moves into each other that I don't necessarily believe it's a bad thing. Platforming challenges feel quite a bit more difficult in this game, especially now that the chicken form has new moves. Heavily leans into tropes in games that get criticized, i.e. alternate timelines or memes, but it does it in a ham-fisted sort of way that I actually thought they were funny. Number 2, Hollow Knight, another great Metroidvania on the list, differs from Guacamelee in that the movement or the move set is significantly less complex, but the game makes up for this with significantly more atmosphere and exploration in its overworld. The story and art design really resonated with me, and the difficulty was just right, where I would feel challenged, but not like I had to fight the same bosses 10 plus times in order to win. Number 1, Among Us. Literally could not have been revived at a more perfect time. Everyone is home-ridden on weekend nights now, so they are looking for something to do. Outside of being just plain fun, I was introduced to a plethora of new people that I've kept in contact with via friends of friends and even further friends of friends of friends. Also got me and my friends back into streaming, where we have been having a blast as a group. So yeah, Among Us still continuing to be quite strong.
I want to give a shout out to an aspect of Guacamelee 2 that I'd forgotten about that I loved about the game, is that it does do a critique of timelines and time travel and how annoying that is in games. So well done, Guacamelee 2, Game of the Year.
Yes, Bally is someone who is the staunch anti-timeline fan on this podcast. I would expect nothing less.
I hear there's some time travel in Star Wars, and I'm not excited about it.
Oh boy, it's just going to ruin every franchise you like, Bally. That's just what's going to happen.
They love it. Everyone loves time travel, apparently.
All I'm going to say, don't play 13 Sentinels in that case. just don't. Next one is from Flapjackal, Bally.
Yes. Thankfully, as I was playing games this year, I wrote out reviews, so I wouldn't forget by this point. Number 5, Link's Awakening. Playing this again was a big nostalgia trip, and I loved it. It was the very first game I ever owned way back on the Game Boy Color, and the fact I could remember tricks and secrets from 20 years ago was mind-blowing to me. The new style was very reminiscent of the images I'd print out on my Game Boy printer, and the sound design for this game is phenomenal. Number 4, Wargroove. Having only got the RTS itch, it's not really RTS, but sure, RTS itch from Fire Emblems, diving deep into the Advance Wars nostalgia of actual unit management was fantastic. Boy, does the default difficulty hit you like a truck. I'll admit I turned it down to normal and didn't have as rough of a time afterwards. Even with it being tough as nails, it was fun and the story was nice and quaint. I look forward to trying community maps and going back at some point on the default hard to S-rank those missions. Number 3, Moonlighter. I'm always interested in roguelikes, but I'm not great at them. But I love little town builders, and I never played a shop manager, so having that all rolled into one was something I couldn't ignore. I played it through over a weekend, and honestly, my favourite part was the little story dispersed in between it all. I really didn't expect the twist at the end, but the epilogue dialogue of it all was funny enough and tied it to a nice close. I do, however, think all the bosses after the second were less and less difficult, and found the most trouble with the second mini-boss in the jungle dungeon. Number 2, Celeste. I slept on this game for too long. I will admit, I don't think I'm good at platformers. In the past, I was better, or at least better at my friends in Super Meat Boy, but those glory days have changed with my worse eyesight and fat thumbs. I had some issues in Celeste, but none of it was the game. It was my poor input or timing, which I don't blame the game for. Still got angry though. However, the songs, the levels, the story, the everything, it was all fantastic. You could make it a quick, easy trip or hunt for those collectibles and take more time. I didn't because I didn't want to throw my controller through my monitor, but one day I may come back and get the goodies. Number 1, Dragon Quest XI. Oh man, what a game. I hadn't had a good JRPG in quite some time, and I had never played a Dragon Quest game until this one, but it did not disappoint. While a lot had what I generally see as Toriyama goofy humor, there was still a solid story, gameplay, and characters in the game. I spent the time to grind all the way to max level and still was able to have a good time in post-game and beyond, having the special Switch version. After playing this, I can easily say I will play future installments of the franchise.
Very, very good. I would love to try Moonlighter at some point. I think I own it like 7 different ways. It's on the Epic Store for free. I think I have it through Twitch Prime. You know, this is the life of a PC gamer, Bally. You just own games that you forget about, and then you look at them up, and you're like, oh, maybe, like, there's a game called Odalus, The Dark Call on Switch, and it was on sale. I was like, oh, I should pick that up. And then I realized I got it for free on PC like 2 years ago somewhere, and it's sitting in a library, and it's like, I need to just keep better track of the stuff I have. But Moonlighter I've heard lots of cool things about, and definitely seems like something I would like to play. But also, I'm just going to say, Bally, and I messaged you about this, and you didn't really respond to me. Dragon Quest XI is on Game Pass now. It's there.
Yes, it is on my playlist, and this is the scary thing about long games on Game Pass is if I start it, will it still be there by the time I finish?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think Dragon Quest XI could be my targeted JRPG of 2021. I can't think of anything else coming along that I desperately want to play. I mean, Bravely Default 2 I've kind of gone off of from that demo, but
there's always Persona 5, you know, that's always another option.
5, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Things to think about.
We'll see.
Cool. Capsule J closes us out with the final list and says, Dear Bally and MBZ, due to quarantine/lockdown, I've played way more games this year than any year before. So far, I've tackled at least 75 games. Now, here's the thing. I want to figure out, Capsule J, is this 75 games beaten or 75 games played generally? Because if it's beaten, my dude, that is very impressive. I'm currently at 60, and I think this is my record for this year, so you've done a bang-up job there. While I tried to keep up with new releases, I mostly played older games, some of which were as old as 1982. However, my top 5 games of the year that didn't come out this year were a bit newer. And number 5, Azure Striker Gunvolt. As somebody that tends to be lukewarm on Mega Man, it turns out the trick to getting me to like it is to inject some extra anime nonsense. Gunvolt was a blast. Shovel Knight at number 4. I put off playing this for far too long. I can definitely see why this is always ranked among the top faux retro indie games. Number 3, Wonder Song. This music-themed adventure game was full of charm and heart. Despite an art style that didn't seem like my thing at first, the story and offbeat cast of characters sucked me right in. Number 2, The Talos Principle. While disregarded by some as a Portal clone, this game's combination of challenging puzzles, mysterious story, and philosophical themes made it a game that will stick with me for quite some time. And number 1, Nier Automata. With a slick sense of style, a fun blend of gameplay styles, and a stellar soundtrack, this was a damn fine video game. Also, for some reason, 2020 just felt like the most appropriate possible year to play a game about exploring the ruins of human civilization. Here's hoping to a brighter 2021. So yeah, Talos Principle getting another nod there, Bally. Maybe this is one we've got to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Also, Wonder Song is one that I have also had my eye on for a long, long time, and is just very unique and interesting as an idea, but I haven't decided to jump into it as of this point.
Nier Automata is another game that I know you've just played that I'm very intrigued by the story, and I think I need to give a go. And it's also on Game Pass, so another one I need to get to.
Absolutely, yes. Maybe you'll hear a bit about Nier Automata in the next section. Maybe not, because I did play it this year. In any case, that's pretty much all the responses we got from people. But if you would like to send in some for next time, so that you can talk about the games that did come out this year, then send them, Bally, once again, to what email address?
Please send them to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. We want your Nintendo Games of the Year list. So all the stuff that's come out on Switch, of which there's quite a lot this year.
Significant amount.
We want your list. So
fantastic. Great. Well, hopefully you all got some other recommendations there for some games you can check out. And I'll certainly be checking out a few of those probably in the near future. But that's going to close out the second segment. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back after the break for a big, beefy discussion of our top 10 games that didn't come out this year. See you in a bit. All right, folks, welcome back to the third and final part of today's episode. We're here, Bally. It's time. Game of the Year 2020 is in full force.
This is the stress-free list where I can just make a list.
Yes.
I don't have to worry about your involvement or annoying you or stepping on your toes. It's just like, it's my list.
I can decide if I want to. The best game I played this year was, I don't know, like a thing I did on a calculator for 2 seconds if I wanted to. And you can't argue with me,
I couldn't argue with that.
You couldn't argue with that, right? Like, it's great. I can argue the best game I played this year was Reading Rhythm of War, which is better than literally any game I've played this year. So, we can do that, but I'm not going to do that. Come on, let's have some decorum here, for God's sake. I'm sure some people will be putting chess on their fucking Game of the Year awards because of the Queen's Gambit, but you know what?
Yes. That's
probably going to happen. Someone on Giant Bomb is going to have a guest list where they'll have chess on that list. I guarantee you.
That's a very good point. I was going to say, for those who are unaware, we should make clear these are 2 top 10 personal lists for each of us, and they are cross-platform, and they're games that we played in 2020 that did not come out in 2020.
Exactly, yes. Our tradition continues of not having a good name for this format, and so we use the most cumbersome one possible. It's great. We'll basically, what we'll do is we'll go back and forth. I'll do number 10, Bally do number 10, and we'll go back and forth until we get to our number ones, and then we'll do a quick rundown of them at the end, and then you will have heard our favourite games that we played that didn't come out this year. Bally, kick me off. What is your number 10 video game of 2020 that didn't come out in 2020?
My number 10 is Lonely Mountains Downhill.
Wow, okay.
If I had to describe to an alien who wondered what a video game was, this is the sort of game I think I would probably show them, where it's much more arcade style. It's like a time trial, and it's almost pure action. You are navigating your bicycle down a mountain in the fastest possible time without falling off, and it's an incredible physics engine. It's an incredible, there's just complete silence while you're cycling down these mountains. And
it's just the sounds of nature and your bike, skidding. In terms of, the video I always want to make, which is, little things in video games. When you skid, the little kind of voxely dirt bits that kick up from the bike, I fucking love that animation. It's so good.
It's just a really impressively put together game. And I didn't play it like a ton. I played quite a bit of it, and it's something I'd quite like to go back to. It is on Xbox Game Pass.
It kind of commits one of those cardinal sins for me, which same as Ollie Ollie, which is like, okay, in order to unlock the next thing, you have to get X amount of medals or X amount of score or do it in under this time in this level in order to get to the next mountain, which I thought was a bit of a shame because I would have liked to play a bit more of it. It's just that at a point the game gets really tricky, right?
I actually don't mind structures like that when I enjoy the fundamental mechanics of the game as much as I do with Lonely Mountains Downhill. Like, totally, I agree, in principle, it's not a great idea, but I was like, this game is so much fun that I'm happy to try and like grind to get the gears to unlock the future bikes. And I think there's some DLC that actually just came out for this, which I assume is included in Game Pass. So I might have a check-in with that before the end of the year. But like, yeah, Lonely Mountains Downhill, fantastic. That's my number 10.
Great. My number 10, I alluded to it in the last segment, but here it is, Nier Automata at number 10.
Cool.
Which I think is definitely, it's one of those games, if I hadn't gone and watched a bunch of videos and read stuff about it afterwards, I don't think it would have made my list. But it definitely gets on here because the things that it does are on a thematic and philosophical level, and just like those ideas that it pursues, it really does nail them, even if I didn't fully see it through my playthrough at the time, and a lot of it maybe felt disjointed and wasn't kind of the type of thing I was super into. Like gameplay wise, and some of the technical stuff on PS4 is a little rough with Nier Automata. It has action combat, which I can be a fan of when it's very flashy and cool, like Devil May Cry 5. And this doesn't quite hit those marks. It is a platinum game, but it does feel a little cobbled together in terms of some of those aspects, just because I believe they came on a little later to the project when Yoko Taro had because the original Nier is one of those games that just mechanically does not hold up very well, even though thematically and story-wise it is very impressive. But yeah, as a meditation on, as opposed to being like, are androids human, right? Which is like the kind of David Cage low bar of like, this is the real hard-hitting question. It is the question of like, what makes humans human? And to what extent is that reflected in the ways that we have tried to run societies and the ways in which ideologies have clashed in the past, and in this world where humans are basically absent for the game, where you have robots and androids trying to contend with these ideas. It's really fascinating stuff, and I think it nails a lot of that stuff, as well as having really cool gameplay variety with some crazy big fights, and some also interesting stuff where one of the characters, you can hack into the enemies and you play a little shoot 'em up game to attack them instead of doing the combat, which I found very refreshing and different. And there is a lot of kind of bullet helly type of over the head or like side scrolling action. It really does change up the camera angles a lot and does some wild stuff, which I found very satisfying and interesting. And it was well worth playing through, even if you do have to play it through a bunch of times. I would argue that saying you have to play it multiple times is kind of a misnomer, because sure, the second playthrough is very similar to the first, but the last few are totally different, and I think like the actual ending is definitely the point at which you should just call it a full game and not just you have to get 5 endings, because I think it's maybe put a lot of people off the game when they hear that. You think, oh, I've got to play through the game 5 times, which isn't really true when it comes down to it. So don't be turned off by that, Bally. Yeah, totally.
Cool. Right. My number 9 is Ratchet and Clank from 2016 on PS4. I never really played a Ratchet and Clank game. Our good friend Ali T was a huge Ratchet and Clank fan, owning the PS2 back when we were little.
Yeah, totally. He was into Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank back in the day.
Jak and Daxter, all those great Sony platformers back in the day while we were off Marioing and Mario Sunshining. Yeah, this game is just so damn good. It looks great. The animation is fantastic. I think the variety in weapons is incredible. It's so simple. Everything is so clean and crisp. When I started playing it, I was like, oh, this is a really kiddie game. And by the end, I'm like, nope, this is not a very kiddie game at all. This is a very hard game in parts.
Yeah, it definitely ramps up the difficulty.
Yeah, and I think it's just a really good example of what Insomniac can do with a good feeling, good movement, good a good playing game, as it were. And this game has made me so excited for the next Ratchet and Clank on PS5. And yeah, I think for someone who's not really played this series before, 2016 is a fantastic starting point. It is like a pseudo remake, of course, of like the first game, I believe. So it's definitely worth going to if you have a PS4, or I guess it's on PS5 as well now. I guess, I don't know, but yeah, definitely check it out.
Yeah, it's part of the PS Plus. Is it part of the PS Plus collection? I can't remember.
I think it is, but I would need to triple check that.
Yeah, very jazzy like effects going on in that game, like particles and stuff. And I think that's kind of like that was the thing with PS4 was like they showed Knack for the first time, and it's like, look at all these particles that make up Knack. And yeah, I guess Ratchet and Clank probably does a much better job than Knack, even though Knack 2 still a good video game. I stand by Knack 2. I enjoyed it. So anyway, Knack 2, not on my top 10 games that I didn't play this year, but probably should be. Shout out to Knack 2. Great. Anything else you want to say about Ratchet and Clank, Bally? Should we move on?
No, all good.
Great. My number 9 is Akamojo Densetsu, which is Castlevania 3, the Japanese edition, that I played as part of the Castlevania collection on Switch, which is a great collection. Got a lot of the series on there, especially because, as I have mentioned before, the Japanese versions of these games, which in the case of Castlevania 3 is the superior version in pretty much every way. Easier, fairer, better soundtrack. I don't know if visually it looks that much different. It's kind of the same, I guess. But, you have stuff like Grant having the ability to throw knives, which makes him much more usable. And yeah, I really enjoyed going through this in a way that I didn't expect to, because I had watched Vinny from Giant Bomb play through this game, his Vinnyvania series, where he's going through the entire series. And when he got to this one, it just felt really fucking hard and incredibly stupidly punishing. To the point where I was like, look, I've played the original Castlevania, and that's already really hard. Do I want to go through even more pain? And the thing is that the Japanese version makes it a lot more palatable and easier to go through. It also helps that Castlevania 3 has multiple branching paths, which allows you to take easier routes through it or harder routes through it. And I think probably taking the easier routes helped me. And also, it's one of those games that you can go back through and play through again to get different stages. And in one case, you can unlock Alucard as a playable character, who I wasn't able to get. I had Cypher most of the time. Cypher, obviously, Bally, from the Castlevania Netflix series, because they are both featured in that. And the Castlevania Netflix series is very much based on the characters of Castlevania 3.
You need to see season 3. It's great.
Yeah, I know. I'm behind on that. I should catch up for sure. But yeah, this game is a great time. I especially enjoyed, because I streamed a bunch of the back half of it. I especially enjoyed streaming myself trying to beat those bosses without save stating. Obviously, I would save state before the boss, just so I had a clean amount of HP going in every time. But I was like, you know what? I've got to beat Dracula fair and square. I've got to do this properly, and it was a lot of fun. Just going through, figuring out, there was a particular glitch I think I figured out, or something that was a fault in the code, where if you ducked in one of the corners, there would be an attack that wouldn't hit you, even if it fell down on the screen. So this giant head kind of floats around, and it drops these kind of like bogey-like kind of droplets down, and if you get hit by them, they do a bunch of damage. If you duck in the...
A bogey-like droplet.
Yeah, kind of. It's kind of like a sludge or slime almost. I would say. But you duck, you press down, you hold down in the left corner of the screen, and even if one goes over the top of your character model, it just goes straight through you and doesn't do any damage. I was like, shit, dude, I figured out the tech in this boss fight, and that was great. Just figuring out weird ways to cheese this boss and to beat him, and finally doing all 3 phases of the Dracula fight without dying, without save states. That felt great. It was a great time, even though, yes, a lot of that fight is complete bullshit, and all the whole level leading up to it is bullshit, as is always the case with these old Castlevania games. But there is something inherent to the move and feel, the clunkiness. Like, I talked about Panzer Paladin in this episode, and like, even though that game is clunky, it doesn't have the same good feel as Castlevania does. And I don't know what it is about it, that there's something inherent to the way those games are made. I just really enjoy playing them, and the momentum and the movement. So, despite them being very heavy. Maybe you should give those old ones a try, Bally, because they're kind of like Donkey Kong Country, very heavy and weighty.
You kind of went off DKC this year.
Yeah, no, it's very true, very true.
I'll play the Duff one, but... Yeah.
Great, so that was my number 9, Castlevania 3, Japanese version.
My number 8 is The Gardens Between.
Nice.
I did it. I finally found the perfect Bally puzzle game. Like this is just my level of difficulty, of presentation, of length. It's so perfect in almost every way. If you don't know it, you are controlling time through dioramas, and you can fast forward time forwards and backwards and change elements within the diorama to manipulate how time passes and manipulate what happens in the stage and unlock the next level, essentially. And you're sort of swapping between a boy and girl, and they each are on different paths and do different things. And it just really worked for me. It's only about like a 3-4 hour game maybe, and I just absolutely love this game. I think the presentation of like those clean, crisp dioramas and what it's asking you to do go seamlessly together, because it's so clear as to like, right, I need to move that thing. And I particularly remember one with like a calculator keyboard where
that's one of the best puzzles in the game. It's so good.
Right, how you type the numbers affects the code, and you need a specific code to unlock the next thing. And yeah, there's just the way it just takes real world objects, plonks them in this world, and kind of asks you to interact with them in a specific way to advance the level is very satisfying. It's on Switch, it's on Game Pass, it's on all platforms. I think it came out like a couple of years ago. I couldn't recommend the Gardens Between more. It's really good. I never had to, I think I did use a guide like maybe once or twice, but I think I did feel like my own fault in that sense. It wasn't like head up against a brick wall multiple times. It only happened very infrequently in this game. And for me, if you're stuck on a puzzle for 10 minutes and then solve it, for me that's like a good sign in a puzzle game, which I think this one is a very good one, for sure, if not the best.
Yeah, I believe this was number 2 on my games that didn't come out last year.
Yeah, so like I think I might even like this game more than you and me. So I think that speaks to the quality of like this list.
Other games on your list,
through.
yeah.
Like, it's a bit of a ridiculous list, but we will get to the top of the list in due time. But yeah, that's my number 8, The Gardens Between.
Yeah, I cannot recommend that game highly enough to people. And I think when it came out, it just didn't make a huge splash either. And I was like, it was kind of the reason why I waited on it was, I think, 18 quid on Switch, and it was like 2 hours long from what people had said. And I was like, like this will probably go down in price at some point, and I'll probably...
I did get it on sale on Switch, so definitely add it to your watch list.
Yes, for sure. But I don't understand why more people didn't talk about it, because it is actually phenomenal. It is a brilliant puzzle game, and I love it. So, good choice there. What are we on? Number 8 for me. Number 8 for me is, we're just continuing the classic train rolling with another collection that I have been obviously dipping into and out of over the years. It's Mega Man 5, the 5th Mega Man. And look, if I'm honest, I can't tell you much about this game specifically, because all the Mega Mans, they kind of blend together. Those first 6 on the NES, very similar, right? Like, you definitely have points at which things diverge, which I would say Mega Man 3 is a big one, because in Mega Man 3 you get the slide, and then Mega Man 4 is the next one where you get the charge beam. But Mega Man 5 feels like the perfect balance, where it doesn't have the bullshit difficulty of the 3rd game, it doesn't have the charge beam that is really ineffective in the 4th game. It's figured out how these things work and what makes them good and what you really want out of this style of game, which is to say, the level design hews much more closely, I think, to 2 in terms of its interest and the places you go. The boss fights seem a lot fairer. It doesn't have the annoying multiple bosses per stage of Mega Man 3. And the charge beam is just excellent. It's one of those things that, playing 4, I was like, this is kind of pointless, and it's really thin, and it doesn't go where you want it to. Now it's just a big blast, and that blast has a great radius to it, and because of that, you can just knock it across the screen, and it'll take out like multiple enemies at once. It just has real good satisfaction to it. And it just makes Mega Man 5 a really fun experience overall. Less of the frustration that I felt in some of the other entries, and for me, I love 2 a lot. 2 is still probably my favorite of the classic Mega Man games, just because I'm so familiar with it now, and I think that the power-ups and the bosses and the way they all interact with each other in 2 is just so sublime. But 5 is very close on its heels, and despite the fact that I can't remember much of it, I remember the feeling I had when I was playing Mega Man 5, and that feeling was very positive. I really enjoy it a lot, and it's definitely, when I think about going back and replaying some of these games in the collection, obviously I'll always gravitate towards 2 the most, but now I'm thinking, you know what, I might just boot up 5 again in January and just play through it again, because I remember having such a great time with it. So yeah, really, really solid, and I only have one more Mega Man to finish, and then I will be allowed, Bally, to buy the next Mega Man collection, because I will have finished one of them.
I was going to say, how many game series these days have 6 installments on a single console? Other than like FIFA and COD, you know? Like, it's just blows my mind when you think about it.
It's like Assassin's Creed maybe on Xbox 360 and PS3 had 6, probably, if you had a push, maybe.
Probably.
But like 6 within the span of how short a time it took for these Mega Man games to come out. Fucking hell, man! Capcom were going hard with this series. They really were. And hey, they did finally make it with Mega Man 5 to a fantastic game. And hopefully 6 is just as good. I look forward to playing 6 probably next year. But yeah, that's my number 8, Mega Man 5.
My number 7 is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. This game is obviously the poster child of 8 to 9 hour AAA game, but much shorter than your standard AAA game, and I think it does fit that bill really well. I think I love what this game is doing around linking video game mechanics to the idea of psychosis and trying to do some pretty trippy stuff when it comes to like enemies and bosses and noises in your head, and linking that to the plot of like what happened to Senua and what she's experiencing, and sort of weighing up what is reality, what is in Senua's mind, and kind of trying to do that through a video game. Like, I think it succeeds on that challenge pretty well, and yeah, it's an incredibly well presented game. I think that there are some very dark, scary moments that I'm like, I was not ready for this. This is very much not my cup of tea.
Pushing up against us being big scaredy cats.
Yeah, we are
definitely
big scaredy cats, although I did play a number of scary games this year. This was definitely one of them, only in parts though, but it's just a really impressive game. I think the fighting mechanics are very simple, but they work for what this game is going for. And yeah, I think that one downside is there's occasionally a bit of crosstalk between activating like little collectibles that say something versus the story coming in, and it's like, I'm hearing 2 voices, or maybe that's what the game was going for. I don't really know, because I think that sometimes they are trying to get you to hear multiple voices. But yeah, I am very excited for the sequel. This game is on Game Pass. It's on Switch. I would highly recommend checking it out. It's not too long. If you're into anything that's sort of third-person story-driven, especially in that fantasy setting like God of War, where it is utilizing Norse mythology as well, it's incredibly good.
How fantastical does it get? Because obviously I know that you fight people with like weird masks and stuff, and that seems to be, well, I don't know, maybe it's imagination, maybe it's not. I'm not sure how the story goes, but
yeah, it ramped early on. It's basically like people with masks in the forest, and are they there, aren't they there? And then by the end, it's the entire world around you, I would argue, where
oh wow, okay,
it's much darker than even like God of War. And I don't want to spoil it. I think it's definitely worth checking out. And yeah, if you don't like it, it's only 8 hours long. Like it's definitely worth doing.
Right. It kind of like, it's one of those things that I hope the game industry does more, which is kind of similar to like Miles Morales and Lost Legacy, which is like, just give us a short AAA game, man. Like, because to be honest with you, stuff like Uncharted, it for me peaks at like that 10-11 hour mark, right? That's where it's like the sweet spot. That's kind of where I like games to be. When you start to become a Last of Us Part 2 and do 20 hours, for me, that's just like, fucking hell, get this over with, dude. We've been looking at this fucking Ferris wheel for 7 hours.
Yeah,
Can I just get there already?
I like both of them, but I agree. Even me, I have to go into each of them with very different mindset. Like my mindset for, a Last of Us Part 2 or God of War is very different to what I would go into with an earlier Uncharted or this game. Like, I think as much as I love the shorter games and the longer games, for me, it's a different mindset. But yeah, it's this one's definitely worth checking out. It's very cool that it's come to Switch. I hear it runs quite well, which is very encouraging. And
yeah, it's one of the better looking ports on the system for sure.
And who knows if the sequel will be next year, but I think it's probably likely to be 2022 because I think they were like filming in Iceland or something when it was last talked about on that Microsoft showcase thing. So who knows when the sequel will come, but I'm very in that world, and it's dark, it's gritty, but it's very worthwhile. So yeah, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, check it out.
Very cool. My number 7. So sometimes we have these games that slip through the cracks a little bit, by which I mean there's usually a game or two at the very end of the year that I play that doesn't qualify for this list because we do it early in December. And that has happened before with Symphony of the Night, where I played that, I think, at the end of 2015, and then it was on my 2016 my 2016 games that didn't come out this year. And that has happened once again. And it has only emboldened me to put this game on this list because of how I fucking hated one of the other games in this series that I played this year. And so my number 7 is Halo Reach, which, my goodness, if you want an introduction to Halo that makes you not want to play the older games, maybe just play Halo Reach and just forget about the rest of the franchise, because this...
I'm glad I started with Halo 1 after your discussion.
But here's the thing, Bally. I think had I started with Halo 1, I think I would have given up on the franchise and been like, this sucks. I'm never playing this series again because of how fucking terrible the level design is in Halo 1. It's trash garbage. Like, I cannot stand that video game. I literally...
We're gonna do the final level in co-op together. It's gonna be a good time.
No, I refuse to give that game the fucking time of day because it is just awful garbage level design that is just terrible and doesn't hold up in 2020, and I cannot fucking abide by the first Halo. It is a trash video game for trash babies. Halo Reach, however, is a refined wine tasting video game for true professionals. No, I really like Halo Reach. I think it was a great introduction to me to play one of these games and teach me that, like, wow, these games are a lot more physicsy and weird than I thought they were, and have like really interesting open expansive levels with great like places for you to take down enemies from and hide from enemies, and you know, a lot of movement that is important in these games, of like making sure you're taking down certain hordes and figuring out like, oh, this guy's running at me, so I need to prioritize him. Really cool weapon variety. A lot of it is figuring out, oh shit, I need to pick up enemy weapons to use those against them because I don't have a huge amount of ammo in my own. But also the variety in terms of the places you go and the things you see. The things on display in Halo Reach are just very impressive overall, and it has a really solid story, and in a lot of ways just hews very closely to like Star Wars Rogue One, or should I say Star Wars Rogue One kind of feels like it stole from Halo Reach for its story for a lot of it. And obviously this game doesn't center around Master Chief, it centers around a different crew of people, and it is, you know, it's a prequel to the series.
I've only put it together now, but Gary Whitta is a big Halo fan.
He is, yes, exactly. That's what I was saying at the time when I played this game, was like, I think Gary probably played Halo Reach and was like, that's a good idea for a story. Why don't
we just apply it to the biggest franchise of all time?
Literally, the ending of Rogue One is just the ending of Halo Reach. It's ridiculous. It's literally on a beach as well. It's like, are you kidding me? You're really going to go this far? But yeah, it's really, really good. And it is really the only reason why I'm still interested in even picking up another Halo game, because the first game turned me off so goddamn much.
I've only played the first two, but 2 is substantially better than 1, and I imagine 3 maybe does that again. And obviously you're on the sort of fourth game, but I wouldn't write off the series just yet. No,
I certainly don't think that's fair to do so. It's just, man, that first game is bad. It's really, really bad. And I don't know, I know, Bally, you're someone who will bang your head against the wall far more than me. Like, when I see something's a lost cause, for the most part, I'll be like, no, fuck it. So I just don't understand how you got through Halo 1.
I like Halo a lot, but I'll admit neither of those games are in this top 10. But
there you go.
That's partly to do with the strength of this list.
But yes, Halo Reach is a fantastic game. Really good fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Great. My number 6, is that the right number?
Yeah, we're on number 6.
It's Slay the Spire.
Wow. Managing to get this high already.
We have already talked an awful lot about Slay the Spire on this episode, so I won't go on much longer. But
yeah, listeners talking about it, us talking about it.
Yeah, everyone is liking Slay the Spire, apparently.
We streamed it recently, just too much Slay the Spire content out there for you.
It's just great. I'm going to go play some Slay the Spire right now. Yeah, it's great. I love it. It's
The question I want to ask you, Bally, is do you foresee yourself keeping on coming back to this game now and again and playing it? Because now I know that you, for the most part, when you roll credits on something, you will move on. And I tend to do that, but there are some games where it's an exception, Hades being one of those exceptions right now for me. What do you think with Slay the Spire? Is it going to go into a rotation? Because it's one of those games. I think it's a tricky game in terms of like a podcast game, because I know you have like Forza for that.
Yes.
But this one is certainly not that. You have to be paying attention.
I can't podcast, you are right, which does get minus points for getting into that rotation, unfortunately. And yeah, Forza's up there for like my sort of podcasting game. Yeah, it deserves to be in that rotation. It's just a matter of getting back round to it. And yeah, I will play more of this game for sure. It's deserved of it, and I just, there's no need for me to be in such a rush to play so many games. Like if I've played something to talk about on the show, I've got a respite to try some other things, dip in and dip out of things. So yeah, I play so many games that like I have plenty of time to both beat games and casually play some games on the side, and it definitely deserves to be in that category to keep me coming back.
Great. I definitely had neglected it for a little while, and then I played a bunch of Monster Train this year, which kind of got me back into the mood of playing more of it. So I have played a bit more this year, but yeah, I would like to try and beat that super hard final boss. I've gotten there once.
I'll race you to it.
Yeah, we should we should try and do it together at some point. That would be fun. Great. My number 6 is probably the best Nintendo online experience I've had in recent times. And that was playing Wild Guns with you, Bally. We played Wild Guns this year.
Yeah.
What an incredibly fun game that I'd heard some stuff about in the past. And, I really do enjoy when Nintendo adds one of these types of games to the Switch Online service, mainly in the Super Nintendo vein, but some of the NES ones I'm looking at and thinking, oh, maybe I will go back to some of those. But another game I played this year was Operation Logic Bomb, that was also like not similar to Wild Guns, but it was, hey, it's a kind of top-down isometric action game that takes maybe an hour and a half to get through, and I played through the whole thing, and I was like, that was really satisfying. Like, it's one of those weird, like, blockbuster rental style games you would imagine back in the day that no one's heard of, that's a really good time. So I really like that Nintendo they're not just doing the big hits for these services, right? They are putting out some weird stuff. And Operation Logic Bomb was one of those. I'm like, I have no idea what this is, but I'll play through it, and I had a really good time with it. Obviously, it's not going to make my top 10 list, but Wild Guns did, just because I think it was just a really fun co-op experience. It definitely took a lot of time to get our legs with it, like just figuring out, okay, this is the reticle, this is my reticle, this is yours, this is how we dodge roll out the way, this is how you use our special weapon. Make sure to always hit Businessman. Businessman is priority.
Businessman.
Shout out to Character of the Year, Businessman. Absolutely my favorite character of 2020. What a good dude.
That final level is quite something. Just
it is.
Trying to save lives and...
It was such a strategy as well, right? Because there's like 5 phases to it, and we're like, the first phase, do we burn a special on the first phase?
Yeah.
Are we going to save it for the end? And the thing I really like about it is we didn't even have to use save states for this game. I think it's really well designed for a classic style one of these, where it saves your progress if you beat a level, and beating a level is very feasible, right? Like you don't have to, it doesn't feel like an overwhelming odds against you like some of these classic games are. It's very much like, okay, we'll play it 3 or 4 times and we get right to the end and we're so close and we lose them, and every time I was like, you know what, I'm up for going again. I think we can do this. It was very motivational in that way. And even by the end, we're kind of making a decision like, should we save state after this first section? Because this first section's really annoying with those two big robots.
We didn't back down.
We didn't back down. And I think, like, you said, like, no, we can do it. And I think the run after that was the one where we did it and we finished the game.
I think our strengths and weaknesses also dovetailed quite well on certain enemies. Like, I'd always die on this enemy. You'd always die on that enemy. I'd always get this enemy and vice versa. And it was like just getting through the level together. It's very, very satisfying.
Totally. I would really highly recommend, if you can find someone else to play with. It is one of those rare things. It's online co-op, right? Which Nintendo rarely ever does. But I'm so glad that they have made it a function of the Switch Online service. And I'm kind of looking at some of these others and thinking we should do this again with something if there is a similar game coming out.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest issue. There's just not quite enough games where appropriate for.
Totally, yeah. But even with some other games, like, we've talked in the past about how we would like to play through the original Zelda or Zelda 2, and doing that co-op, like switching the controller back and forth, would be a fun thing to do. Maybe stream that at some point,
Yeah, totally.
So that would be very cool. But I had an absolute blast with Wild Guns. I think it's a really great classic game, and is definitely on my list of favorite Super Nintendo games now. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. My number 5 is A Short Hike. When you think about open world games and just how long and sometimes laborious they can be, this game just takes all that out of the formula, but still gives you all the wonder and joy of exploration and discovery. And I think it's just such an impressive, very short open world game in that sense.
Yeah, and when we think about this year, especially, of games taking from Breath of the Wild, stuff like Genshin Impact or even Immortals Phoenix Rising, I don't think either of those games have gotten as close to the feeling of Breath of the Wild as A Short Hike does.
Right, totally. And yeah, it really does feel like Breath of the Wild in so many aspects, especially the aspect of climbing and gliding and upgrading that sort of skill tree, as it were, where you do gain the ability to climb further and higher and tougher, and where climbing is such a intrinsic part of Breath of the Wild, this game makes it even more intrinsic, arguably, where the aim of the game is to get to the top of the mountain, and there are so many sort of different ways of getting there, and there's different ways of upgrading that skill tree, upgrading your feathers in order to complete the game, but likewise, you can spend 4 or 5 hours with this game and actually collect every single feather in the game, and it's just delightful, the array of characters, the whole bunch of different animals, the artwork is very unique. It's these real large pixels which looks incredibly distinctive,
very DS-like aesthetic,
very
which I appreciate.
DS-like. Absolutely. And you can like scale that aesthetic as much as feels comfortable, which is also very welcome. And I cannot recommend this game enough for anyone with any sort of Nintendo sensibilities, or into open world games, or even into cute animal games like Animal Crossing. Like it has that vibe about it.
Fun writing as well. Some like really
Very
good character writing in there.
Yeah. And it's fantastic. I love this game. That's my number 5, A Short Hike.
Very cool. My number 5 is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Now, I would have liked, Bally, for this to just be an out-of-nowhere thing that I said, this is my number 5, and you had no idea I'd even played this game. That was originally the plan, but then we did our episode, our Patreon episode, about... what was it? There was something... It was about the book, the Apprentice.
Master and Apprentice.
Master and Apprentice,
Yeah.
the Star Wars book. We did our bonus podcast, and that's where I dropped the bomb on you that I had...
What's the business called, the organization?
Oh, fucking hell. I don't even remember now.
That's the bit that links to Knights of the Old Republic, but anyway,
Yes.
Star Wars.
Bing! Hello, Editing NBZ here to tell you that the name of the corporation that we're thinking of was the Zerka Corporation, spelt C-Z-E-R-K-A. Zerka. They rule the galaxy with an iron fist of capitalism. They must be defeated. Anyway, that was the thing I forgot, and I remembered it while I was editing. I didn't even go to WookieTubia or whatever it's called. Wikipedia? Anyway, back to the show. Bing! Star Wars. Yes, so I actually started playing KOTOR at the end of last year, probably September time. So this was a really long burn for me in terms of, I think I put 35 hours into it, so not a huge amount, but it was like a very slow picking it up here and there, playing a bit more, getting a bit further, until like I think April of this year, or maybe March. I think, no.
So you were prepared to wait almost like a year and 2 months to reveal at this moment.
Yes, I was, totally, pretty much. And it was the problem. So the thing that happened was, it was 2 weeks before Jedi Fallen Order came out. That's when I started it, right? Because I was like, okay, cool. Let's get in the mood for Star Wars. And I was like, I can beat this in 2 weeks. Turns out, no, it took me 6 months to finish it. So, and I think part of it is because it's kind of a slow-paced game, right? Like, you definitely take your time. You go to different planets, and it's really, really good. It's for me, mechanically, it doesn't hold up so well, especially that final part of the game is just a nightmare. And part of it was I actually used cheats at the end of the game just because I was like, you know what? The part of it was also COVID was happening, and it was literally the day before my train to Edinburgh. I wanted to be done with it before I went to Edinburgh. So in March, I was like literally getting close to midnight, and I was at the final boss, and I was like, I'm just gonna go into the Steam thingy and just go and type in some cheats, and that's what I did. Made myself invincible and finished the game that way. Mainly because like it's D&D combat. So literally you'll do dice rolls will be happening as you are fighting, and it just feels a little weird, and I think that style has probably been done better in modern games at this point in time. However, the storytelling and the places you go to, the characters are fantastic. It really has twists and turns. One of the most famous video game twists is in KOTOR, and obviously, Bally, you wouldn't have heard of it because you're immune to these types of things. But I did know about it. It was still very cool when it happened. And knowing what it is, I could see the foreshadowing of what was being told to me as it was happening beforehand, which is very neat. And yeah, it just has... There are some times, right, when I would be doing this random thing. I would be going on to do this quest, and I would find these 3 people just out in this expanse. And they were like... Okay, so this one guy has been killed. This guy is accusing the other guy of doing it, and the other guy is accusing that guy of doing it. And you have to talk to all of these witnesses, go through these dialogue trees, and figure out who was the person who did it, who was the culprit. There's another one, which is like a Romeo and Juliet story between 2 kids and their rival families on this planet. And like some of the storytelling is not what you would think of as traditional Star Wars, but it's just good storytelling. It's just really well done pieces, like vignettes almost of moments that you interact with, you become the mediator of, and you figure out and know what happens. There's another one that's a murder that takes place on this planet that is all underwater, and you're trying to figure out who did it, and like multiple storylines converging. This is really the kind of BioWare that I think people want to go back to, which is narrative rich, dialogue choices, like the kind of stuff that Mass Effect did super well, that KOTOR kind of was one of the kind of founding fathers of in terms of this style of game. And it is just, for a game that came out so long ago, it holds up so well story-wise and Star Wars universe-wise, going to some of these planets that we know, but also going to some of these planets that I've never heard of before, and the idea that it's all taking place thousands of years in the past, where the Sith are an idea that is not the same as the rule of 2, and the Sith like have guards who call themselves Sith even though they aren't force sensitive. Very, very cool game. Overall, I highly recommend people checking it out. I hope it gets remade, because it's one of those games that really deserves a full-on remake, because it is a little bit old PC, kind of clunky, a little bit janky, but the other aspects are phenomenal.
You see, between this game, Dragon Quest 11, and probably Witcher 3, I might try and tackle all 3 RPGs next year, but I might
Bally, that's a bold task, especially when you tell me you can only do 1 RPG a year. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll certainly have to do 1 at a time. It's just a matter of which one I do first. We'll see.
No, Bally, just play all 3 at once, motherfucker. That's what I'm challenging you to.
That will go really well.
Hey, look, if you get a Series X, you can just fucking have them all in different tabs and just ping between them, you know?
That is nice. That's
the
nice
dream.
idea.
That's the dream.
Right.
Okay.
My number 4 is Overwatch.
Wow. Only number 4.
Only number
Rob,
that's how good
Rob,
this list is. Yeah. Overwatch. So I could probably play another 30 hours of Apex Legends and only get marginally better at that game. I feel like if I did the same with Overwatch, I would become substantially better at that game.
Yes.
I think
Yeah.
it's way more my format. There's hardly any dead time. You can play the game in so many different ways, I would argue, in comparison to a game like Apex Legends, where you do have like a tankish character like Winston, who he's not about the long range. He's all about getting up close into your grill and then jumping back out again, or playing as Hanzo, where you are kind of at range and there is that sniping and there's arc and his arrow fire and everything, or, playing as, I don't know, Orisa, and it's like the more standard idea of a tank that gets up right in the middle and puts up shields and fires firepowers through the middle, and playing as a team, knowing how to heal, like utilizing all the members of your team in the best possible way. And matches are so short and brief that if it goes pear-shaped, you just play another one, like it's such an addictive loop. And I love the world building. I love the characters. I love that they are. It's a bit like the Marvel universe where there's real world locations, but also made up countries as well, and it kind of mixes that together. And there's this.
Have you finished watching all of the cinematics at this point?
I have now, yeah. And
nice.
I just love the sort of United Nations feel of it all, and I love that aspect. I have no idea what's going to happen with Overwatch 2, but I'm completely in this universe.
That Overwatch 2 cinematic is really good, actually. Like, it almost has that Marvel feel that you were talking about of, they're coming back, man. Like, it definitely has that vibe.
It's really good. Obviously, I've played on Switch, and you picked up on Switch, and we've had a great time playing together.
And I was thinking, like, well, I did only mainly play for that week and played like 10 hours of it. However, I am going to Edinburgh for Christmas, and I know I will get Overwatch withdrawal. So having it on Switch is just a godsend, honestly.
It's really good.
So nice to just have it there to play.
Yeah, and I know it feels very different to all your favorite characters, like on PC, but
but that is kind of nice, right? Because I never play Lucio on PC, but I'm a fucking demon as Lucio on Switch, and I love it. It's definitely just given me a different perspective on some of these characters, and ones that just feel better on sticks versus mouse and keyboard. Because even Mercy, who I love playing as Mercy is a PC character for me 100%. Like, just the amount of switching I have to do and the speed with which I do it and flicking between the different noodles, shall we say, is just much. It just feels wrong playing Mercy on sticks, even though she isn't like a Twitch character in terms of her aim and stuff like that.
And like, there's still so many characters I've barely touched, if touched at all. And so because they are so fundamentally different, I have so many ways of experiencing that game in a completely different way that I'm very excited to go back to that game. And a bit like Slay the Spire, probably more so than Slay the Spire. This is like on my rotation. I want to go back. I want to get some skins. I'm in the skin game.
Oh, you're in the game now, son. Christmas, mate. The Christmas skins coming up. They're some of the best ones.
When does that Christmas event start? Do you know? Is it started?
I think they usually announce it like probably next week, I would imagine. Okay. It goes for like 3 weeks or so, probably.
Very exciting. So yeah, it's all just great. I love it. It's fantastic, and I think when Overwatch 2 does come out, and I probably play it on like a next gen system, or as we say now, a current gen system. I think that step up graphically could be quite nice because, as you say, like with Switch, it looks good, but like when you look really close, you can see some of the textures and things like that.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, that's not a big deal because that's not really what the game...
It's a very cartoony style, and it works for what it's going for.
The game still plays well on Switch, which, I'd heard not great things about it, but I think, at 30, it holds relatively stable, aside from there are moments where shit is just popping the fuck off and it does drop a little bit, but, it's still a very good game on that platform. Good stuff.
That's my number 4, Overwatch.
My number 4 is a game that no one has ever heard of. It is Touhou Lunar Nights, which is probably the best Metroidvania I have played this year that didn't come out in 2020, because there is not any other ones on this list. It's really good. This game is so slept on. Holy shit, dude. So I was following this for a little while because there was a Reset Era thread that was like, Team Ladybug are secretly making the best Metroidvanias. I was like, who are these people? So I looked at the thread, and they had made in the past a Shin Megami Tensei themed Metroidvania style thing for one of the anniversaries, I believe. And I remember that happening. I remember that having some buzz on Twitter, and I never downloaded it and tried it out. But they then took the Touhou franchise, which I believe is like a shoot 'em up like bullet hell franchise, and turned it into a side-scrolling Metroidvania with this game. There is another one which is, I can't remember the name of it. It's on my Steam wishlist, but it's also in a similar vein with, I think, maybe a slightly different franchise, but has incredible fucking pixel art, and like the animation is out of this fucking world in that game. So I'm looking forward to it. It's currently in early access, but I will play it when it comes out in full release. But Touhou Lunar Nights takes that idea of the bullet hell and basically turns it into a side-scrolling Metroidvania, not in the same way as something like Outland did, because Outland was much more traditional in that sense of like little bullets. This one, your character has knives, and they just throw knives, and they throw them in like fucking tornadoes of knives. So you're just like chucking knives like crazy at people, and you basically go through. It's much more linear, I would say, than a lot of these other games. More similar to a Fusion style, or even more linear than that, I would say. There's not a huge amount of exploration going on. although you do get some power-ups that like help you and get you further on. One of the coolest ones is this idea is you pause time, and so you can throw a bunch of knives while time is paused, and that takes away from your time gauge as opposed to your mana. So you have your mana when time isn't paused, you'll lose mana by using your attacks, and when you pause time, then you'll use up time instead. So it's beneficial for you to use up time, because time is a resource that regenerates a lot faster versus mana that is kind of slower, and you only get it back by getting very close to enemy attack. So one of the coolest things this game does is there's a system called graze, where if you graze by a bullet, you will gain mana back to you. So it's basically risk reward of like, if you've used all your mana up, you can't really attack, you need to just get close to the bullets that the enemies are firing, and you'll build up graze really fast, and that will give you all of your abilities back again. So it has one of the most tricky final bosses that I fought in a long time, but also super satisfying to figure out and finally beat. Just really, really fun. All mechanics, all day. There's no story to mention here. The story is complete fucking nonsense. The localization is kind of terrible, and it doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. But the game plays like a dream. Like, one of my favorite things about it is mechanically, right? You throw these knives out, and you get an upgrade later on to where you throw knives, and then you can use those knives as platforms. So in order to reach higher places, you don't just get a double jump, which I think you do get a double jump at some point, but you can use the knives that you've frozen in midair that you have thrown as platforms to get higher. Such a cool fucking idea, and just utilizing attacks in a way to use platforming in a similar way that Guacamelee does in some senses. So I always love when stuff like that comes together. It's really great, and it will be coming to Switch, I believe, soon. It's cool. Not quite on Switch yet, but it will be. And if you have never heard of this before, this is an under-the-radar Metroidvania. Touhou Lunar Nights. Touhou is spelt Touhou. Do check it out.
Is it on Game Pass?
Yes, I played it on Game Pass. It came to Game Pass, so that's when I played it. So highly recommend it.
Adding it to my watch list right now.
Absolutely fantastic. Great. Bally,
my
number 3.
So I'm just adding it to my play later. There we go. Perfect. My number 3 is Forza Horizon 4. As a Nintendo gamer, it has been... It felt like an eternity before I'd played sort of like a proper driving game. And even going back, what I would class like a proper driving game at the time was even really arcadey, like Burnout 2 Point of Impact. Like, that was kind of the main semi-realistic driver that I'd played growing up. And I needed that. Like, even buying a PS4 in 2018, I hadn't even like checked in with any major like driving games. And everyone says Forza is the perfect driving game, both from like an arcadey and a simulation perspective. And getting an Xbox, obviously with access to Game Pass, Forza Horizon 4, obviously set in the UK and has Edinburgh as one of the main cities in the game. Is
literally the only reason I downloaded it is just to ride down Princess Street and just like look at all the stuff. And I was like, this is why. Even showed my sister it, and she was like, what the hell is this? This is crazy. Because like, you never see Edinburgh in media, really. It's awesome.
And I think so. It came out in 2018, and isn't that the same year as like Avengers with the scene in Edinburgh?
Yes,
so
I believe so. It was the year of Edinburgh, basically.
Year of Edinburgh, yeah. But I just absolutely love Forza Horizon 4. The variety is incredible. I think that the showpiece missions are stunning, like where you're racing a train or a hovercraft, or even
that giant like boat thing that's like blown up, a giant blown up boat thing that glides across the ground. Hovercraft, that's it. Yeah.
And like racing, like driving as Master Chief in a warthog, like facing off against the what are the alien race in Halo called, for God's sake?
The Covenant.
The Covenant, exactly. Yeah. Seeing all the Covenant ships and all that theming going on in and around Bamborough Castle, which is weird, like this North England castle.
And the giant fucking Halo thing just in the sky above you.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, just turning the UK into a massive Halo in itself. It's like, this is wild.
It's a decent enough setting for it, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
and even if you don't want the Halo mood in that mission, there's Halo songs on the radio, which is very cool, on like the classical radio station, which I really enjoyed. And all that aside, the cars are fantastic. The variety of races between off-roading, rally, and street circuits and point-to-point racing is incredible. Like, I had an absolute blast. Like, every time I was just like, yeah, I'm kind of done with rally for now. Then it just felt like a completely different game doing something like street races around Edinburgh. Like, it just feels so different. And even playing like Motorsport 7 now, which has some street circuits, there's something really cool about the open world nature of incorporating street circuits into Edinburgh in that open world and just kind of racing around that. And I think one of my biggest concerns going into the game was I knew you unlocked cars through credits, and that credits you had to accumulate. I guess you can also pay for, but I didn't want to pay for them, obviously.
Loot boxes, man. Just
Loot
fucking
boxes.
spin that wheel.
So I was worried about how do I make sure I get enough credits to experience great cars, and you get so many free essential loot boxes when you level up that
yeah, you get loads.
It doesn't take much luck to get a lot of credits. But on top of that, they have missions that specifically, it's like a series of 10 chapters where it's like the supercar, chapter, and you can play 10 different supercars in races. And sure, you can't drive those cars around in the open world, and maybe that's more fun if you can unlock that. But I really felt like I got my fill of the absolute top fastest cars in the game, even from just those chapters. So like,
and were you able to like buy your favorite one as a result of that? Like after you'd done them?
Yeah, I mean that's actually a good point. So what I did was I was like, I'm saving up credits. I had sort of earmarked a few of the best cars in the game and thought, I'm not sure how any of these feel. I wonder which one to buy, and I actually mistakenly bought one that felt crap, and I felt really annoyed because I spent so many credits, and that was before I realized these chapters existed. So I kept saving up again. I played the 10 chapters. I was like, right, the McLaren F1 is my favorite car out of all of these. I'll save up for just that one. And then I unlocked it, and then I basically did all the street circuits and all the road circuits with that one car to like beat the game in the end. And so like that's a really satisfying loop for me, and was a big concern going into the game. So it guarantees that you have ability to try out cars, have the ability to unlock the cars that you want, but also just have the ability for just a massive variety across so many different types of racing. And yeah, having it in the UK is an extra bonus. Edinburgh's fantastic. I think it's a nice representation of like the Highlands, and there's some very sort of Cairngorm-esque hills and mountains going on. And yeah, the English kind of towns look very stereotypical English. I don't really have much reverence for those, but it's really cool. I love it. I know that there's kind of like semi-rumors about Forza Horizon 5 for next year and being in Japan or something. I think that would be unbelievably cool. But for now, Forza Horizon 4 is like the best driving game I've ever played by an absolute mile. Not that I've played many, to be fair, but I think it just does everything right. As someone who tends to be more towards the arcadey, so I've decided I'm kind of on a scale. I'm not arcade or simulation. I do like somewhere in the middle, and I think Forza offers that middle ground so super well, where Burnout is awesome, but I don't enjoy crashing cars. I don't enjoy doing massive cartoon style drifts. I actually do enjoy the realism of going around.
Hang on a second. Don't enjoy cartoon style drifts, Mr. Mario
Kart's a bit different. Come on. But when it comes to actual cars, I do like semi-realistic. But at the same time, I don't like an analog stick accurately representing a steering wheel where you will have a ton of understeer and oversteer going into corners and all this horrendousness that, simulation does attribute to sort of analog sticks. So I think Forza does a really good job of just hitting it just right between kind of arcadey, kind of simulation, somewhere in between, and I absolutely love that. So yeah, I've already ranted and raved about Forza a lot on this show, but if you've got Game Pass, you absolutely have to try it. And I think Forza is gradually turning me into a bit of a car buff, which is a very scary, slippery slope to be on. But that's just the way it is.
That's the way it is. It's always been there, Bally. It's always been the beating heart underneath.
It's always been lurking below the surface. But then I got the Xbox, and it was like, right now,
yeah, Nintendo couldn't fulfill your desires. They never put out realistic racing games. So.
And out of like the sort of Microsoft first parties, it really is like the sort of creme de la creme in my view of like what makes Microsoft unique above all the other companies and whatever. And so Halo's great. I really enjoyed Hellblade. Don't get me wrong. These are great series. I need to get into Gears, whatever. But it's like they're real. We can do racing games better than anyone else, driving games.
Yeah.
And
they really have just shat all over Polyphony. Like Polyphony took too long with Gran Turismo,
right.
and now they're behind.
Yeah. So. I think people just generally will go to Forza far more than Gran Turismo at this point in time. Although I appreciate there's a lot of hype for when that new Gran Turismo game also comes to PS5. But yeah.
for sure.
Cool.
My number 3 is one that you have already mentioned on your list. It's a short hike, because I also played it this year, and I echo pretty much everything that you said about it. It's really brilliant, and I just think that some of the little moments of, doing the little volleyball mini game, or like finding someone who has lost something and you have to go find it, right? Like it's all the additional things that take you off the beaten path, using the little shovel to go and find things that are hidden in the ground, very Animal Crossing style. It really is like this perfect blend of Breath of the Wild and Animal Crossing, and all these other kind of small narrative games, to make something that is really digestible, short, and delightful, and just leaves you with a good feeling after you finish it. It's definitely the definition of, you think about a game you sit down and do in one sitting, a short hike is like up there with the best of those, for me, and it's really, really fantastic. So not a huge amount extra to say aside from it's brilliant. It's a really good game. So it's my number 3, a short hike.
My number 2 is a game that's been talked about a little bit on the show over the years. That's Ori and the Blind Forest. I obviously didn't own an Xbox. This game came out originally on that system and PC, and then did come to Switch last year, I want to say. Or
it was the end of last year, because I
replayed
replayed it on Switch end of last year. Yeah.
And I sort of added it to my watch list. I think I might have picked it up on sale. I can't remember.
I think it came out to sale at the end of last year, and we both picked it up then, is what happened.
Yeah, and it was on my list of like games to play, and obviously you love this game so much. A lot of people who know Metroidvanias online rate this game very highly. I feel like people who aren't into Metroidvanias, as usual, it kind of went under the radar for many people, which was incredibly sad and such a shame. And then Will o' the Wisps has obviously come out this year, and that was having its own bandwagon. But before any of that happened, I made a point of playing Ori and the Blind Forest fairly early on this year. And my God, that game is incredible. The
game is so good, you bought an Xbox.
It's so good that I was like, I need to play Will o' the Wisps. I need to play it. How can I play it? And to be fair, it was a combination of Ori, but Will o' the Wisps, but also the access to like Game Pass. I just wanted something I could have access to Game Pass on, preferably with my TV rather than having a gaming PC.
Right. Yeah.
And because that Game Pass is such a good deal if you haven't heard already. And I knew that Will o' the Wisp was coming day one, so I was like, now is the time to get an Xbox and play Will o' the Wisps on day one. And that game didn't disappoint, but that's for another discussion. But for now, Ori and the Blind Forest is a fairly flawless game, honestly. I think while the combat feels weird for that game, it kind of works. And
it doesn't feel weird to me at all, because I'm just so used to it. It's just almost burned into my brain, so that even when I'm going back to Will o' the Wisps, I'm like, oh right, this game has real combat versus the strange light ball. It's until you meet the real combat in 2 or Wisps that you're like, oh right, okay. But in the first game, I'm sure going back to it, at least I need to go back to Ori and the Blind Forest, but like the combat is a very small part of the overall game and what they're trying to do. It's not really a big deal, honestly. And the game does a good job of not focusing on the combat in that sense, where there's not really bosses as such, as we've said before. It is all about those escape runs, and they are much tougher in this game than the sequel, and way more difficult. And I do wish the sequel was a bit harder. Honestly, that's one of my few flaws with Will o' the Wisps, is I wish those escape sequences killed me 10 more times than they did, because for most of them, I think every single one I did first time, maybe second time, in Will o' the Wisps, which was to me a bit disappointing, despite how spectacular they are. I wish they were harder, and maybe if I play on hard mode, that will be the case, though I don't know if hard mode is just more, you take more damage or whatever. I'm not sure how they...
Yeah, again, it's probably just like ramping up the maths with the enemies more so than the actual platforming, but who knows? Like, I do think the first game, it emphasizes platforming a lot more. Those escape sequences are stunning, and like the Ginzo tree, as you've said before, is just one of the best sequences in gaming, full stop. The build up to that moment is the first 2-3 hours of the game. It's just, well, maybe even the first hour if you're playing at MBZ speed, is incredible. Like, and it runs unbelievably well on Switch. I think that from a Metroidvania perspective, it's fairly linear, but that totally works for this game. It's not as linear as a Fusion, I would even argue. I think there is a bit of backtracking, bit of going.
You can definitely, and I think you did this more so than me, because I usually wait until the very end to do cleanup. I think you were much more like, I'm going to get stuff as I go.
I do love cleaning up on the way, mainly for the reason that I'm scarred from Metroid, Super Metroid, where I basically fought Ridley with something like 4 energy tanks or something.
You
stupid.
Fucking lunatic.
And I was like, right, from now on, in every single Metroidvania, I'm going to try and get health along the way, because if I neglect that aspect, I just end up struggling on like a boss, and there's not really like a big boss that you can meet in Ori in the Blind Forest that you're going to keep dying on, but I wanted that health. I do actually like the save point system in this game as well. Like,
I do as well. Yeah, it's
I'm not saying the second game's weaker as a result of not having it, but it's just a different take. But this game is very raw and difficult and tough, and I like that about it. And obviously we've already spoken about the combat, but this game is all about the escape sequences and that platforming, and it is the bash, as you've said before on the show, is incredible. I'm so glad that was also in the second game. It's a stunning game. It's a very This Nintendo Life game, for those who are unaware by this point of like our preferences and things. So yeah, pick it up. It's on Switch. I think it's fairly cheap, actually. It's on the cheaper end of games from what I can remember. Can't speak enough highly about Ori and the Blind Forest. One of my favorite games of all time, and number 2 on this list.
And it turns out, Bally, you didn't need to buy an Xbox because they put the sequel on Switch anyway, so there you go.
Well, I have played like about 20 games on Game Pass, as I discussed briefly, so I've gotten more out of my Xbox than just Ori and Forza, I promise.
It's just an Ori box,
it's just
guys.
the Ori and
that's
Forza box.
All you need. That's all you need. Great. My number 2 is a game, Bally, that you have been hounding me to play for ages and ages, and I finally did, and I'm very glad I did. My number 2 is Night in the Woods. Having played Kentucky Route Zero this year as well as Night in the Woods, I think it puts into stark relief how much more I like something like Night in the Woods in terms of giving a clear, cohesive ideology and a political message, but also having a storyline and a plot.
That clear characters, clear story, but also a message. It just intertwines them a lot better than Kentucky Route Zero, in my view.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, it's a much stronger package in that way. The characters are so incredibly well realized. The dialogue and the writing is incredibly sharp. It looks delightful, and the weirdest thing about it, it feels really good to play as well.
Yeah.
You know, like the ability to jump on the wires and go around town, and, you know, just bounce on rooftops and go and feed the rats, you know, every day, and, you know, stealing the donut or whatever from the stall, and like doing the little mini game of the hand, like quivering to try and steal something. The entire section in the mall with B, and I think B is probably my favorite character in that game of the group. Shout outs to Greg. Greg is great, but B is really interesting, and the story arc you go through with her is a fantastic one. And yeah, just what a relatable like set of circumstances for like our generation, and just the ideas that it digs into about the state of America. Especially, I think, and I was re-listening to Giant Bomb's Game of the Year when this came out, and one of the sequences for best moment that they shouted out was the poetry slam moment, which I also talked about on the show, and is just an astonishingly fantastic moment in that game that kind of comes out of nowhere and just like sends you on your ass, like in terms of the way it is delivered and just the tenacity and the sharpness with which all those ideas are just laid out. It's just fantastic. I think this game is fantastic, brilliant, just well realized in every aspect. And I personally wasn't that into the kind of supernatural story element aspect of it by the end. It was a little weird, and it didn't, I don't think that aspect fully came together, but the rest of it
kind of is playing into conspiracy, white supremacy, linking the two, and yeah, I liked it, but I agree it's not maybe like one of the strong points of the game.
Totally. It definitely lands strong though by the end, and phenomenal game that I should have played soon. It's one of those Pikmin 3 ones where I was like, why didn't I play this before Bally told me. It's because I'm stubborn and I'm like, I'll get to it at some point. But it was...
you did play it when it became like free, right? So
it wasn't free. It was part of the ridiculous itch.io bundle with like 1,500 games in it. I was like, okay, well, now that I have access to it, because it's one of those games that never goes on sale, or at least didn't.
And it's come to Game Pass since then.
Now it's on Game Pass as well, exactly. So you have no excuses now. It's on Switch as well, and you played it on Switch, Bally.
Yes.
It is a fantastic game.
So good.
Narratively, one of the strongest I've ever played. So.
Great. Glad you played it and enjoyed it, because it's a very special game.
It's very good.
Right, my number one. Here we go.
Well, let me guess. Is it Xenoblade Definitive Edition, Bally?
How did you guess?
Yeah.
My number one is The Last of Us. I played this fairly early on in the year, and I was kind of like ticking off the boxes of like, the big PlayStation first party hits. And I played I think I played a couple of the Uncharted by this at the point I played this, or maybe I played all three. I can't remember now.
I think you played all three.
I think I played all three. I played Uncharted 3 last year.
Well, basically going through Naughty Dog chronologically, it seems like, because this came out after Uncharted 3. So.
I had never watched a Let's Play of Last of Us like you had, MZ, and I was kind of like, right, I should really just play this game. And I kind of asked Caroline if she wanted to sort of watch along with me and experience the story with me. And she was up for it. And I definitely...
I remember you asking me about how scary it is and how much zombies is there and what, because this is the type of game that for us, it's part of the reason why I didn't buy it, even though I had a PS3 back in the day. It was I was too much of a wuss to just play Last of Us, and I'd rather just watch someone else play it. Is kind of where I came down on it.
I mean, having played Last of Us Part 1 and 2 and The Walking Dead in the year 2020
and Hellblade,
I've decided I can cope with horror and scary things when I really want to. I think a series
I mean, the thing is, if you really want to play PT, I don't think you're going to be able to handle PT. Same with me.
Okay, fair enough.
There are some things that are a bit too fucking much, Whereas I think, for me, zombies are a much lighter form of horror. They are less threatening and scary than whatever fucking shit is in PT, right?
Yeah. And also, Last of Us is... I mean, I'd argue the first game has fairly few direct horror aspects, especially compared to the second game. But the first game, it's almost it's the mainstream horror game, and the mainstream horror game is never going to be quite as dark and horrendous as the actual horror games.
I would always also argue that most people wouldn't classify it as a horror game.
No,
right?
No, it's story, narrative driven. Third-person shooter first and foremost, and aspects are scary, especially with the second game versus the first. But the first game there's a lot of dark stuff in there, definitely more so than I would even say necessarily horror or anything. And that it's just a fantastic narrative. Coming into it from what I'd played at the time, it definitely surpassed almost all the narratives I'd sort of experienced with the Sony first parties up until that point. I actually put kind of Spider-Man maybe up there as well, for very different reasons, obviously. But in terms of telling a story of two characters working their way through a world, their personal relationship, and much less about the world generally in the first game, actually, especially in comparison to the second game. But it is just so much focus on Joel and Ellie and what you can do in a video game to, show off a narrative and the relationship between those two. And how that can relate to gameplay in some small ways later on in that game was truly stunning at the time. And I like Last of Us Part 2 for a whole bunch of different reasons to this game, and I'm very glad that the games, I would argue, are very different in many senses. There are some similarities that I'm sure we'll get to in later discussions, but Part 1 is still a fantastic game in 2020, and have mixed feelings about it becoming a TV show. I'm sure we'll get to that on the show eventually, but the first game, if you've not played it and you don't know the fates of these characters by now, definitely play it, although I'm sure you'll know some of the big beats. But it's a fantastic game. It's generally not too scary, where I think most people could probably get through it, and I was glad I played it on easy. I still died a bunch, honestly. I think the first game's actually fairly difficult.
Did you play the second game on normal?
Yeah, I died a bunch on both games, to be honest. And I think a lot of that actually is panic and the feeling of, there's
a lot of panic that goes on playing those games.
Yeah,
for sure.
But But the first game just has so many story moments that I remember so distinctly. And as much as I love Spider-Man and God of War and these other narrative-driven games, I can still remember the most clear moments, in especially Last of Us Part 1, just that stand out so vehemently in my mind. And I'll never forget those moments. Like, they're just really special moments in video games. And yeah, everyone's already heard about Last of Us Part 1, but that's my 2 cents. so
there
yeah,
you go.
My number 1.
Because everyone was waiting for the Bally verdict, and it's finally in. So good stuff. It's weird that you bring that up, because despite the fact that I watched a Let's Play of Last of Us, 7 years ago, and played the second game this year, I remember more about the first game than the second, and maybe that speaks to my opinion of the second game. Yeah.
But and we'll get to this, I'm sure. But to the credit of the second game, I'm glad it, in the most part, it does something quite different to the first. Like, I think they could have easily.
It's incredibly fucking bold what that game does.
They could have trotted out something way more in line with what the first game did or goes for, and I think critics would have still praised it in its entirety or whatever. But I think I personally would have been like, yeah, it's good, but I mean, come on, this is Naughty Dog. They can be bigger and bolder than that. And love it or hate it, they definitely did that with 2. So it's cool where they went with it.
Totally. My number 1 just proves that I'm wrong about genre.
Oh boy.
And I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. It's fucking Dead Cells. Apparently my favorite games this year are just roguelikes. Man, I don't understand it. But
is this the closest thing to Hades before you played Hades, would you say?
100%. If Hades hadn't come out and just usurped all my time, I would probably still be playing Dead Cells at this point in the year. This is the weirdest one, right? Because I did pick this up at the end of 2018, I believe. Same with Valkyria Chronicles 4. And I was trying to kind of rush through them for the end of the year, trying to see if I want to put them on my list or not. And that was just a bad call, right? Part of it was the Dead Cells was really fucking hard. And so I came back to it. Randomly, like I didn't even think I was going to start playing it. I literally booted up my Switch one day and was like scrolling through my games, and I was like, let's just boot up Dead Cells. I booted it up and I started playing. I was like, oh, okay, I'm doing quite well on this run. Had the update. Yeah. I was like, oh, I'm doing quite well on this run. And I'm like, oh shit, I got to like the final area on this run. And then I died. I was like, all right, well, okay, I got to the final area. Let's do this again. Got to the final boss. Died on the final boss. I was like, I can beat him. I think I can beat him. My third run back to the game, I finished the game. I beat the final boss, and I was like, shit, dude, did they change? This is like a fucking Jaguar moment for Guacamelee of like, did they change this shit? This seemed like a lot easier. Have I just
gotten better at games?
Yeah, somehow did I just like level up? But no, they did. They'd made it much easier. And from that point onwards, I was like, shit, dude, this game's really fucking good. Because it turns out that when you lower the barrier to entry in terms of some of the difficulty, the pure systems of Dead Cells, the movement, the momentum, the weapons, and just the variety of weapons that you have feel so good. And there's a pseudo-Metroidvania element to it where you can find permanent upgrades in the world, like a wall jump. There's a wall jump ability, there's a wall run ability, there's an ability for you to use certain transports that you weren't able to before. Like there's this electric kind of buzzy area that you can transport to a part of the level you wouldn't have if you didn't get the upgrade. So it just opens up the map a lot more to you and gives you shortcuts to certain areas that you wouldn't have had access from the beginning when you initially start out. So it was basically, I beat the game and then I was like, all right, well, I need to go and collect all the upgrades. So I went and did that. And then I was like, well, I've beaten the game like 5 times now on regular. Let's bump it up to Boss Cells 1. And boy, Boss Cells 1 kicks you in the fucking teeth. It's basically like they took that default difficulty and they basically split it out. They were like, okay, how about we take this default difficulty from the beginning, make it much easier, and then make it much harder. So like there's this big gap. I kind of wish that Boss Cells 1 was a lot closer to the default difficulty that was originally in the game, because I think at this point I probably could go back through and finish it in that level of challenge, but they've kind of just smoothed things out over the board and just made things a lot harder. The furthest I've got with Boss Cells 1 is to the final boss, and he fucking wiped the floor with me. Like, it wasn't even close. So that's still an ongoing project, I think, with Dead Cells, but the way they supported this game, I paid like the £6 for the new upgrade that they did midway through this year, that added a whole new area and a whole new boss and things like that. They're doing another one, I think, that's coming next year. Great ongoing support for a game like this is the type of thing that I would love to see Hades do. hopefully, and maybe we'll see a big expansion for that game. But yeah, if Hades hadn't come and taken my attention this year, Dead Cells would have been one of my favorite games with a bullet, like this year or not this year.
Cool.
It just completely bowled me over, and it's one of the best examples I can think of a game that I started and was like kind of lukewarm on and didn't understand why people were raving about it, and then came back to it later and was like, oh shit, this is one of the best things I've ever played.
You know what game is now like, I would argue, is calling out to you and deserves a shot and a go of your time, is the Spelunky series now. You know?
Yeah.
Like,
so
I don't know.
Here's the thing, right? All these roguelikes that I'm a fan of have some sort of progression.
Yeah.
Spelunky has zero fucking progression. It doesn't care about you. It will kick you to the curb.
Purely knowledge. It's
purely knowledge. You're not progressing in any way aside from your own development with the game. And I have found that the roguelikes that do that, I bounce completely off of, because I don't have a meta level progression of the game itself. Part of the reason Hades is so fucking good is because the progression is the strongest it's ever been in one of these games.
Is there a darkness equivalent in Dead Cells?
No, the equivalent in Dead Cells is cells, basically. So anytime you defeat an enemy, they'll usually drop a cell or two, and harder enemies will drop a lot more of those cells. And so you use these cells to pump into upgrades that will unlock a new weapon or unlock a new ability or modifier for you. So you're always unlocking something, and there's this huge kind of array of jars in the opening area before you start a run. There's a giant wall behind you with just empty jars, and as you unlock new weapons, the jars fill up with those weapons. And I swear, like, at current point in time, I'm like 30 hours into Dead Cells, I have maybe less than a quarter of those jars full. So there are so
that's mainly variety, whereas I would argue darkness is actual strength in some way.
Yes, totally. Right. Hades, the game makes you better by giving you stuff to make you better. Dead Cells is much more variety in what options you have.
Sounds more like Into the Breach in that sense, where you unlock more units,
options.
Options,
yeah, it's like Slay the Spire and Into the Breach more so, I would say. Hades is definitely the roguelike, which makes you more powerful, more so than most others.
And Spelunky's like, you're not unlocking anything new, you just got the knowledge.
You just got the knowledge, and you got to deal with it.
Interesting.
So yeah, absolutely bowled me over. And then there's my secret number one, which is Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, but that would be cheating if I gave that number one.
I've got a secret number one as well, and that's most definitely Game Pass.
True.
Definitely.
Yes. Very true. That is true.
I've spent a ton of money this year on video games, but I was just saying off mic, I've also saved a ton of money, and that is thanks to Game Pass. So,
it's kind of Game Pass is bringing the PC gaming future to console. Really, is what it is.
Pseudo free games just dropped on everyone all the time. It's
totally. Great. And even if the PC client is a bit busted, and I've had my issues with launching certain games and not being able to run them properly,
they'll get there.
And we've had tons of issues. Just even we wanted to play Gears 4 co-op, and it just refused. It was like no, and I was so annoyed.
One of their biggest first-party games, and it just would not work.
Same with Astroneer. We've had a great time with Grounded and Sea of Thieves. Sea of Thieves was limited just because I was so sick because motion sickness ruined me with that game. But yes, hopefully when I get a new PC, things will be a bit smoother, or they'll smooth out their processes, because crossplay between Xbox and PC is such a good idea, man. It's really cool. I guess to say of my secret number one, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition just reminds me and makes that game stronger in my mind than it ever was before. I found Melia just as an amazing character to use mechanically, just understanding her moveset and how she works, and that helped obviously with Future Connected because she's kind of a main character there, so playing as her and Shulk was a lot easier when I went through the kind of bonus epilogue content. But yeah, cool. There are parts of Xenoblade that I'd never really explored before. There's so much of Machna Forest that, like, past the village, that I'd never been to areas that are fucking huge areas that I just never explored for whatever reason. And I found them this time, and I was like, Jesus, there's so much stuff going on in this game. It's just enormous. And I did so many of the side quests, as I think Maitreya mentioned in the email section, much more than I did originally. Fought a bunch of those really hard pseudo bosses that have names that are kind of named enemies that usually I just steered clear of because I was enjoying the combat so much more this time and just understanding it and what to do and what moves to give people, and like Dunban just even better than he was when I first played the game. So still one of my favorite stories and characters and world and music. It is just, it's everything that I want from an RPG. Exploration, just, it's a perfect video game for me.
It's pretty old at this point as well, 2010. That's cool that it's held up.
It is 10 years. 10 years ago to this month. Bally, it was 10 years ago this month that I walked into a game, and on the recommendation of RFN, I saw Xenoblade. £20 off. I just finished Skyward Sword, and I picked up Xenoblade Chronicles, and now here we are, 10 years later, and it's still one of my favourite games I've ever played. So, yeah.
Shall we run through our lists and then do a few honourable mentions?
Definitely, that sounds good.
Okay.
You want to go first, Bally?
Yes, my number 10 was Lonely Mountains Downhill. Number 9, Ratchet and Clank 2016. Number 8, The Gardens Between. Number 7, Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice. Number 6, Slay the Spire. Number 5, A Short Hike. Number 4, Overwatch. Number 3, Forza Horizon 4. Number 2, Ori and the Blind Forest. And number 1, The Last of Us.
Savage list. My number 10, Nier Automata. Number 9, Castlevania 3, Akamojo Densetsu. Number 8, Mega Man 5. Number 7, Halo Reach. Number 6, Wild Guns. Number 5, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Number 4, Toho Lunar Nights. Number 3, A Short Hike. Number 2, Night in the Woods. And number 1, Dead Cells, with honourable mention, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive, which is a secret number 1. But yeah, that's our list. Bally,
so
you have probably quite a lot of shout-outs to give.
There are a lot of very good games that are not in this top 10, and I hope you will not scream too loud, MBZ.
Okay, yeah, because I can't remember which ones you haven't put on there.
So Forza Motorsport 7, I'm not really fully beating that game. There's a lot more time I want to spend with it.
No, Bally, why? Not for before Motorsport 7! My favourite game!
And, the one I was going to say was Chrono Trigger.
Fucking fuck! I want to scream, Bally. I want to scream.
I really like Chrono Trigger. It's just I played it in the wrong year, MBZ. That's its problem, honestly.
You made a terrible fucking mistake by starting Chrono Trigger and then buying a fucking Xbox. I was so mad. I cannot tell you how fucking mad I was that you did that.
I'll quickly move on to some other games. Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. I really like that game, genuinely. Like, this should make top 15. What Remains of Edith Finch also would make top 15. The Walking Dead
Great
Season
game.
1, definitely. Mario Sunshine, Mario 64. I didn't include either of them. I don't think they would have made it, even if I had.
Would Sunshine have made it? Do you think Sunshine would have made it?
It's probably not.
Okay.
Probably
all
not.
right. You're not a complete madman. That's
not.
good to know.
Both the Halo games I've played, Combat Evolved and 2, didn't make it. Original Super Hot I play on Game Pass. Unravel 2, I had a good time with
Super Hot.
Caroline.
Jesus, dude.
Yeah.
That was my number 3 one year.
I know.
God.
I know. This is the thing. Like I'm the quality of games I'm catching up on versus you for the last 3 years, 4 years, whatever you want to call it, has definitely been stronger generally, just because you played more when it came out or earlier or before the podcast. So we're on this.
Yeah.
We're on the same train where Bally's list is like just this crazy high scoring list. But yeah. Yeah, Donkey Kong Country 2 is never making this list personally. What the Golf, a game that I have huge respect for, but aspects didn't click with me personally, and it was the first game I played of the year, but came out last year, was Outer Wilds. I think that is such an incredible game. Just aspects didn't quite click with me, and all the games in my top 10 are absolute, I would argue, like top 50 games of all time potentially. Genuinely, like, and that's already a fifth of my top 50 in that sense.
Yeah,
which is
ridiculous,
mad.
man.
So yeah, it's certainly at least top 100, easy peasy. But yeah, what other games have I? Yeah, Wild Guns. I had a great time, obviously, as well.
Yeah, I love Wild Guns. Great.
Yoku's Island Express was fine.
That's really weird to me, because when you played Yoku's Island Express, you were way more positive on it than I was.
I mean, I like it a hell of a lot more than Nintendo Dogs Plus Cats, and it's good. It just doesn't make the list. Guacamelee 2, obviously, I played recently. So yeah, some great games there. But 30 games had to become 10, 14 of which were apparently on Game Pass when I counted. So yeah, half the games more or less are Game Pass, but top list from me.
Cool. I don't have a lot, really. It was a weird... There's a lot of games I played this year that I was just like, I don't actually like this.
I think we were
that
so
much.
hot on new releases as well that perhaps your not new release list was weakened by the number of new releases?
Maybe, but like Spyro 2, that was a bummer, man. The end of that game was like, go collect all these fucking things. I'm like, fuck off, Spyro 2. You know? And then you made me play Okami, and I was like, this game's not that good, actually. Isun is the worst character in video games.
I'm glad Night in the Woods recovered my reputation.
Yeah, just slightly, just because Okami just dragged it down so much. I honestly don't fucking understand.
You need to have a conversation with Ali T about your views on this game.
Probably. I don't know. He did play it when he was a child, though. So, like, the problem with nostalgia is it doesn't give us a very good idea of what...
Well, I played it recently, and I had a great time, so there.
And, yeah, and it's fine to have a wrong opinion. That's totally okay, Bally. That's totally
We're only in the
fine.
first Game of the Year episode, and you're already getting out the wrong opinion line. That's far too early.
I want to shout out the Crash games, because Crash 2 is a game from my childhood that I might have put on here just for nostalgia's sake, and I was thinking about it at one point, making my number 10, but then, like, you know what, those Crash games are not actually that good. Nier Automata deserves that spot more than Crash 2 does, so that's why I gave it to that. And then obviously the Mario games, you know, I didn't feel good putting Mario 64 on there because I've already played it. Uncharted 2 I replayed this year. That game's still fantastic. I can't put it on this list because I've played it before, right?
Yeah, I felt that about the two Mario games as well.
Yeah, and even Sunshine. I mean, I'm not going to put Sunshine anywhere close to a top 10 list. Come on, am I out of my mind? No. But hey, that's kind of how it went. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot else. You know, I played Bomb Chicken, which I was hoping was going to be good. It wasn't that great, unfortunately, which was a bit of a bummer. So yeah, that's pretty much our games for this year. It was okay. I think these last few years have been a bit weaker for me generally with these lists, but there's always games in there, like my top 3 especially, 3 of the best games I've ever played. You know, like there's always the top end of it is always really, really strong. So
I think this is the strongest list I've had overall generally, and like the bottom end of my list is the strongest I think it's ever been, and I think that mostly is thanks to Game Pass, I would argue. But yeah.
Pretty much. Great. Well, thanks everybody for listening. It's been fun going through all of these, and thanks for sending yours in. You can send more of your lists in for next show, which will be in 2 weeks' time. Bally, where can they send their emails telling us their Nintendo games of the year for 2020?
Please send your emails to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. We want your Nintendo lists, so... bunch of stuff came out, even though maybe not from Nintendo themselves necessarily, but there's a load of good stuff. I think it was a really strong year overall.
Absolutely. You can obviously go and support us on Patreon as well if you'd so like to hear our non-Tendo episode, which will come out in a week's time. That will be in between those two, where we'll be deciding our non-Tendo best game of 2020.
It's a joint list.
Yes, so you can...
It's where the line of bad opinions comes out a bit more often.
Oh boy, Bally. I will have some fighting words for certain video games, let me tell you. So yes, do please head over there if you would be so inclined. That is for $1 a month. You can check out our bonus podcast at patreon.com/thisnintendolife, and we would like to thank some of our patrons, Bally.
Yes, thank you to our $10 tier patrons. They are Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my fiancée Caroline. Thank you for your $10 tier support, and thank you to all of our other patrons. And as MBZ said, for $1 a month, you can sign up to listen to this non-Tendo Life, where we will be covering our non-Tendo games of the year. It's been quite the year for the non-Tendo games generally.
Yeah, some very good things out there. Cool. You can find us in various places across the internet. Our podcast is on Twitter at TNL Podcast. Gives you links to the YouTube channel, to the Discord, all those good things, as well as telling you, what we're having coming up in the future. You can find me at Lord NBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN 91. And yeah, add me on PlayStation 5, I should say, because
Bally wants to just take on people in Astro's playroom, you know?
Right. If you think you got the chops with Astro, I want you to come on. I'll see your time as a friend, and I'm going to try and beat it, because MBZ's not got a PlayStation 5 right now, so I am actually the best of all my friends. The sad thing is I don't have any friends, so if you
Has Shaq not played any Astro? Not into it?
Apparently not. I need to check that out. Yeah, I'll bug him, because I mean, he's weak sauce on that stuff. Come on, I need some need some real gamers who are going to give me a good time. So yeah, if you think you're a real gamer out there, add me on PlayStation 5, Ballyman91, and yeah, let's race some Astro Playroom. It's great.
Great. You can find the show in various places. We're on Spotify, we're on TuneIn, we're on Stitcher. A shout out to people listening on Spotify. We just got our Spotify Wrapped for the year for podcasters, and all our numbers are in like 300% increase from last year.
The biggest increase was in Canada, so thank you to all the Canadian listeners out there.
Yeah, shout out to Canadians listening on Spotify. You're boosting our numbers. Thanks for that. That was great. Good to see. Also scary to see how many hours we've done. Apparently 59 hours of podcast this year, not counting Patreon episodes and not counting the 2 episodes we're about to do. Or put up, I should say. So yeah, probably clearing a good 70, 80 hours of podcasting this year, which is a feat. But yeah, that's a cool thing. You can go and review us on iTunes. If you would love to give us a Christmas present, then please head over to iTunes, give us a review, because it's kind of the algorithmic platform for which all podcasts are decided upon popularity. So that would be very nice, and we would be very thankful if you did that. That's pretty much it. Obviously, we're going to be doing a Nintendo show next week, and then the final show of the year the week after that. Bally, how are you feeling about Christmas? It's going to be a weird Christmas.
We're also very hot on this current Mandalorian season, and we'll have to put up a discussion about that. Full spoilers at the end of the season, so expect that.
Yeah, not much Star Wars to talk about at the moment. Mandalorian's carrying the banner, so there will be traditional Star Wars podcast coming out, of course, about Mandalorian at some point when that is over, which will be soon. Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll see you very soon with some more chat about video games, our favourite ones, and probably a lot of arguing, which hopefully is good-natured.
Debating,
doesn't involve...
not arguing, debating.
Yes, debating, yes. We're high-class individuals here, absolutely. So look forward to that. That'll be a lot of fun, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interludes from today's show were Canada from Panzer Paladin, copyright Tribute Games 2020, and the second version of the boss theme from Slay the Spire, copyright Megacrit Games 2017.